when you go on Adam and Sitch, you think you're going to get to dunk on lefties. And instead, I'm sitting here arguing the definition of morality and ethics for 20 minutes. And I appreciate
Well, wait a minute. You brought, I thought the name of your stream, wasn't it something like bringing libertarianism to Sitch and Adam or something?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
But libertarianism through everything.
No, right, but I'm saying like it's not like you're like, hey, here's this issue about lefties. Let's talk about this. Let's dunk on them. I'm like, yeah, no, you brought this up. This is your fault, Scott.
My chat keeps telling me to bring up Jangles because I fucking destroyed him in modern day debates, and they're like, they hate Jangles. Just bring.
Oh, recently?
Jangles.
Well,
no, I it's like 6 months ago, maybe.
About what was the topic?
It was like queer theory or like grooming in schools. And
nice.
I just opened up reading and explaining queer theory and he was like, what? Who are these people? I don't understand this. Like, let's talk about Disney movies. And I was like, no, dog, we're talking philosophy and social emotional learning. And I'm going to fuck. My chat is like, bring it up. It'll save you. And I'm like,
first of all, thank you, chat.
Testing. Is my audio working all right?
Yeah, sounds great.
All right, awesome. What is happening with my fucking video?
Are you live right now?
Yeah, I'm always live. Sorry.
Okay. What's up, everybody?
They're chilling. Where'd it go? Why'd I have to redo this? There we go. Is that working? There we go.
We are not live, obviously.
Yeah. I figured as much.
Sitch, Fabian's live, just to let you know, Sitch.
Oh, that's good. I was about to say the N-word.
Well, okay.
I mean, so I'm on Rumble, so if you want to, as long as it's not directed at a specific person, I don't give a fuck. I mean, that might come back to haunt you, but I'm good. I don't care.
I don't know if it's on your end, Adam, but Fabian's kind of peaking in Zoom on my end.
Okay.
Right, hold on. Let me just back up a little bit. Is that better?
Oh, keep talking.
I'm talking. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog.
No, it's. I mean, it's still peaking to me. Is it peaking to you, Adam?
I guess. I mean,
well, did you have ears, right? Does it sound okay to you?
It sounds great. It sounds fine to me. But
on my end, it sounds kind of gainy.
Peaking?
Like I can hear the gain is too high.
What does that mean?
What do you mean? What does that mean?
Gain.
I don't know how else to explain it. Maybe he knows what I mean when I say that. Yeah,
I'm gonna
sure you do.
Just a second. I asked him my audio was good, and he was like, "Sounds great." So, yeah.
What does your chat say anything?
No,
maybe it does.
Never helpful with audio.
Okay.
I guess it does sound a little odd, but
hold on, pause. Is this better?
You're very quiet.
The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog.
Now it sounds like you're in the other room.
All right, we'll have it.
I know.
All right, the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog.
That's much better. That's much better.
All right.
Just don't.
Really?
Scream.
You think so?
I think you'll be okay. As long as you don't eat out. So.
You think that's better?
Compared to what?
To what it was before?
I mean, to me, before it was like.
I'm actually rendering a video.
Uh-huh.
I was rendering the Treasury Fed video because the audio is super low in that.
Oh, you're making it louder? Yeah.
And I made the audio louder, yeah.
Did you ask that guy?
Fuck no. I don't give a fuck.
You're just going to re-upload his video and not ask him?
Yeah.
You can't do that. You have to ask him. Say, listen, can I re-upload your video with better audio? You can't just do that.
He hasn't been on YouTube for 7 years.
Well, you can at least ask. See what he says. Maybe if he doesn't respond in a week, you'd be like, "Ha-ha!"
Look, this project began 15 minutes ago.
Oh my god!
I don't have time to ask. I just
You're
thought,
responsible.
Look, Fabian is an anarchist. I figured we could watch this video together and probably trigger.
Oh! I thought you were going to re-upload it. You're just doing it to watch today.
Yeah,
Then yeah.
maybe. What do you think?
I mean, as an anarchist, I don't believe in IP. So you guys do whatever you want, but
swipe his video.
You want to keep your channel. You gotta make sure you change the content.
Well, when you see this video, you'll laugh your ass off at what Sitch is saying because it's just ridiculous. This video is by some economics nerd. I mean, it's a great video. Don't get me wrong. The video I love, but at the same time, I don't think we'll get in much trouble.
What the fuck?
Sorry, back.
I'm not used to using Zoom because I'm not a grandpa, and
wow.
You know what I mean? Like I'm using like programs that streamers and YouTubers use. Anyways,
poor people.
Poor people.
How do you like that?
Yeah.
How do you like them apples?
True. You know what? There is a direct correlation between about socioeconomic status and age. I agree. Yeah. No, I like minimized it and couldn't figure out. It was like this little window, and I was like, "Come back."
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Watch out, that happens from time to time.
It turns into a pop out when you minimize it, like, and you can't like undo it unless you click the little button.
Yeah,
I figured it out. We're good.
It's okay.
Talk, you guys. Come on, he's live over there, Sitch.
I'm reading Twitter.
What's going on Twitter? Now I have someone chasing after me on Twitter.
Hold on, pause. Speaking of Twitter, what the fuck is it with you and fucking blocking Andrew? What is it? Come on, man.
Well, I block people who seem dishonest to me. So,
dude, you were the one.
Look, I blocked you. You're here on the show, dude.
Listen.
Like, look, I'm A-Team is all about forgiveness. Okay, I'm about letting bygones be bygones. But if you're gonna show a consistent pattern of being like a piece of shit, I don't want anything to do with you. I really don't. Like you. I don't know why. Look, I can't even remember why I blocked you. I don't remember why I unblocked you, Fabian. But I'm about second chances and like forgiveness and all that shit. So if we can have a good conversation, but the reason I block people is because I do feel like they're being dishonest, or they're just, some people are not actually dishonest. They're systemically dishonest. If you listen to the show, like there are some people who they're too dumb to realize that they're being dishonest.
So hear me out. Number one, the reason you both blocked me and unblocked me is because I'm based, right? And at one point in time, you couldn't handle the base.
To be determined.
Later, you unblocked me because you knew I was based. All right. Number two,
maybe that could be true.
Andrew might be a right-wing chud, but he is not dishonest. Okay, he's one of the best fucking people I've dealt with in this entire space. You should give him a second chance. All right, they're a little wacko because it's a whole bunch of like tradcon real conservatives, right? But that whole space of like people, like if you want some real conservatives like Jim Bob, it's a window to a whole bunch of people that actually know what the fuck they're talking about. And
he's the first.
She was lying. Come on.
He's the first conservative that I met that's in favor of reparations. So that's interesting.
He's in favor of a bunch of stuff. Sometimes he's just memeing, right? But
memeing, the epitome of dishonesty.
Yeah. Oh my God. We're using Zoom. We're anti-memeing. What is this boomer hell I've stepped into?
Uh-huh.
Well, no, you just said, look, did you not mean? Look, memeing can mean a couple of things, but in the context of what was just said, it sounded like you were saying he's not in favor of reparations, but he might pretend to be in favor of reparations just to trigger people. Is that not dishonest, or am I wrong about that?
I don't know what his stance on reparations is. Like,
I'm in favor of honest memeing. Okay, I believe in a world where one day we can all meme as one.
Right. Like what I mean is like in one debate, he'll take a position that is his position, but he'll argue an extreme, or sometimes he does so as well.
He'll mop and bucket.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's just the same as what anybody does when they force someone else into an extreme hypothetical, right? Is that he'll bite the bullet on an extreme hypothetical right? But he's really talking about the principle of the matter, not necessarily the absurd hypothetical, right?
Hmm.
And in that regard, he's memeing.
I got
I mean, he's a real deontologist, I guess.
I'm glad I don't know anything about this drama. I'm gonna keep it that way.
No, Brianna Wu was like calling him a racist and shit on your show, and it's like that's not.
Oh, that Andrew. Okay, now I know.
Yeah, he's good people.
Right.
Don't
no,
go
I
live
don't.
till we
Yeah, I
can
don't know
stop
about this
talking
Twitter
this,
drama
'cause I
between
just
Adam
like
and
it's not
whatever.
worth.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm just saying, you got to give him another chance. You'd be surprised. There's a lot of good people in that community, and a lot of crazy people in that community.
If he wants to like suck my dick or something, maybe, if he wants to show up in my DMs begging for forgiveness,
Wow,
on his hands and knees.
Wow. Oh my God.
Well, no, I'm just like, what the?
You're just memeing, right?
The trad orthodox are not going to be down for that.
Oh, listen, I'll say I listened to.
This is actually officially memeing. Okay, I don't I have no feelings about this whatsoever. Okay,
I'll say is I listened to the first hour of the conversation. I don't think Andrew was racist from what I listened to. So.
Well, I don't either, and I didn't call him a racist either. I said he was making the ecological fallacy, which I think I'm on firm ground with.
Right, and then he said, "Show me," and then you blocked him.
Yeah, because I'm not. Look, if he can't tell, everyone in my audience, look, we're laughing about it. We all can see easily, and I laid it out in the first tweet. So why do I have to go through and find examples of this? He should find examples of it. Look, I just pointed it out.
Negative. That would be proving a negative. He's claiming it's not. But regardless, I'm just saying you should give him a second chance. He's cool people. I'm doing my due diligence as a friend of Andrew, right?
Okay.
And he's good people.
Should we start and stop talking about Twitter drama?
I know, it's just it's so crazy.
You brought up like Twitter drama, and I was like, "Hey, my boy, you."
No, wait. I just said I was reading Twitter. That's all he said. Okay.
Twitter
you can't
drama,
put this on my shoulders,
sir. Same difference. All right.
Okay.
Well, now
nothing but drama. All right.
Okay.
Now it moved. The goalposts move here, though, Sitch. They moved from I called Andrew a racist to I insinuated that Andrew is a racist.
Okay. Whatever. I don't. Let's just move on.
Say that.
Listen, I don't want to get sidetracked, pitted into more Twitter drama. We learned our lesson from Sunday, right?
Did we?
I think we did.
Okay.
I think we did. Okay. Anyway, I'm gonna press the button. Right? Is everyone ready?
I'm ready. I have a little light graphic designer.
Okay. Now it's your boy PSA Sitch here with another Tuesday stream with everyone's favorite Twitter
drama person. I knew you were going to say it because
of course I'm going to say it.
We primed you. We totally
whatever we
you.
Talk about 5 minutes before we start is what I label you as.
Always primed. Yeah, exactly. I saw that one coming. So we're here with a very special guest. We have Fabian Liberty. That's correct, right?
I don't like the way you said special, sir. It felt like you were trying to put me into the window looking back.
Like the special that wears a helmet.
Well, I didn't mean short bus. I didn't mean short bus special, but if that's the way that you took it, I mean.
Yeah. Look, I'm Scott from Fabian Liberty. I have a co-host, but I do all the.
Oh, well, there you go.
So,
hello.
Okay, Scott. Yeah. So I'll let you introduce yourself then. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Scott from Fabian Liberty. You can find us on Rumble, and then some of our content on YouTube, Fabian Liberty, or find me on Twitter, etc. Yeah, I'm an anarcho-capitalist, libertarian. I was looking at some of like the comments before, because I'm live now, so I'm not like in your comments, but I was looking at some of them before, and they were like, "Is he a libertarian? Is he an ANCAP? Blah 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 blah." I want to state before we even get started, all right. That all of you minarchist, limited government statists are fucking fakertarians, all right? Libertarianism, as recaptured from de Jacques by Rothbard, is a full adoption of the non-aggression principle, which requires you to be an anarchist. But I know a lot of people won't get that. And I understand that people believe that the two are different, so I'll accept.
Wow.
I'll accept it, but I'm letting you know I'm both.
Well, I just want to lay down some ground rules before we get started.
Go ahead.
We don't like monologues on this show, so sometimes we invite guests on and they start going on a 25-minute tirade about some topic, and they basically do like topic bingo, so it's really difficult for Sitch and I to respond. Sitch and I, as you know, if you watch the show, like we do back and forth, like we box. So we like to get back to down to the substance of the argument, and a lot of times it requires asking questions and interrupting and clarifying and that kind of stuff. So that stuff is okay. I don't necessarily know what we're going to discuss. You had sent me a DM, and in the DM here, let me see if I can bring it up. You had said,
it's probably a super old one, the original one.
I mean, it's from yesterday.
I was just like a year ago. You're like, what are we going to talk about?
This says from this is from 2:58 yesterday. So I said, you said pursuing anarchism from of the libertarian variety. That's what I put in the title. And I mean, this is a difficult thing because, like I said this on the Sunday stream, I said a comment, libertarians want to privatize everything. And as soon as I said it, I thought, I'm going to get in trouble for that, because we have libertarians run the gamut from wanting to privatize everything to just, wanting lower taxes. So there's a large range of libertarianism. So when you're talking about doing anarchism of the libertarian variety, I don't necessarily know what you mean. So maybe you can elaborate on that a bit.
Yeah. So colloquially, libertarianism is this idea of a liberty-minded individual, right? And so I think it comes kind of from the same thing of like, what is a Republican, right? Is a Republican a neocon? Is a Republican an isolationist, right? Like these are mutually exclusive ideas, and yet we both recognize that there are Republicans that are isolationists and there are Republicans that are war hawks, that are neocons, right? And so I think the same thing happens within libertarianism, where colloquially, we look out and we say, well, what is the LP, the Libertarian Party, or what is libertarianism? And it does run the gambit from classical liberalism, right? All the way to anarcho-capitalism. Now, the reason I was kind of memeing in the beginning is just because, retaking the word libertarianism or libertarian from from de Jacques, right? From the leftist anarchists in Europe that had that word, was done by Rothbard. He was the first anarcho-capitalist. And so in many ways, technically the word is one and the same, but yeah. I mean, like I accept that when people think libertarianism, they think of that large group, and that large group contains a lot of different people with different ideas, just like Republican or conservative or Democrat or progressive, etc.
So anarchism.
Oh, wait. Let me.
Yeah, go ahead.
So what is it? What is like the point then of, I guess, trying to recapture the word in the way that you want to recapture it?
I mean, I think Sitch. Sorry, it's so hard. It's difficult. I think you see the value in the way that everything is kind of downstream from philosophy, and in a lot of ways that also means the words that we use, right? And so, if the word freedom, if the word liberty, if the word libertarian, and pick a important word, is subverted to mean something that it didn't originally mean, then you can kind of change the argument by capturing the enemy's words. And so in a ways there, I see value in gatekeeping, or at the very least elucidating that subversion to a certain degree when speaking to people.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. We see this a lot. This is a massive leftist tactic, is to try to control language in this way. But I guess like with the libertarian thing, even if the term started out to mean the way that you're saying it does, it's so ingrained, I think, in people's mind, like what it means now, as opposed to like being an ANCAP or something to that effect.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was an interesting thing, and this was an unpublished work by Rothbard, where he toyed with the idea of not calling ourselves anarchists, right? despite the idea that, we derived our philosophy from Proudhon and Benjamin Tucker, Lysander Spooner, etc., because it had been so captured by the left, like, ever since Kropotkin and things like that, these commie fucks, that it was like, well, maybe we should call ourselves non-anarchists, right? It was just kind of like him jotting down because like we're so different than them, right? But I do think there is value in recapturing words. But I also understand that opinion too, where it's like sometimes you kind of have to let it go. I mean, that might be a personal choice. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, like, anarchism is, I would probably wager, is more thought of as the left generally, and probably has a negative connotation for most people. So, I mean, yeah, if you want to get a different label, I would understand that.
Yeah, right. Like it's like I almost kind of agree. Like maybe we should call ourselves non-anarchists, but it's like at the same time, it's like none of these anarchists, these leftist anarchists, once you boil down their philosophy enough, you realize that they're not anarchists, right? Like they want to recreate systems of authoritarianism.
Well, the dangers, I mean, you guys could call yourselves nappers, but that sounds a little too close to maps, so that might be a little dangerous.
Or kidnappers, you know what I mean? Or, yeah,
exactly.
I don't know about all that one.
Right.
I feel like the memes would create themselves.
So, did you see Into the Spider-Verse, the new one?
I have not. I've reached a point with like all of the Disney woke shit at this point that like I just like the moment I start hearing people bitch about it, I'm just like, I'm gonna go watch Blade Runner.
Well,
I can't do this.
Well, first of all, it's Spider-Man. I mean, I guess I don't know if did Sony or Disney. I don't remember if Sony or Disney made the last Spider-Man. But there's a character in it who's an anarchist, but he's a left-wing anarchist. So
yeah, I've heard of that, and it's like I don't trust them to have done any.
Well, they kind of make fun of anarchy through the character, in my opinion. So kind of like mocking it. But anyway, what were you going to say, Adam?
Well, I was just going to try to dive in on a definition of libertarianism. I mean, it's nice to talk about the origin and whatnot, but obviously terms can mean different things in different time periods and kind of leave. Yeah. So I mean, when I think of libertarianism, I think of maximizing individual rights as opposed to collectivism. And I have a very visual idea of how that works with, in an individualist society, you're generally putting the needs of the individual above the needs of the group. So we'll join different organizations and whatnot, but we always know none of us are willing to die for these organizations. We join them in sort of a collective bargaining type of way. We know that if we band together collectively, we can, get a better deal for us for wages or working conditions or whatever. So, but a lot of people think that is a collective, but I don't define a collective that way. A collective is something like a military unit where you're sworn to die for the unit. You're basically putting the needs of the unit above your own personal needs. That I would define as collectivism. And that's generally where you run into the problem with like fascism and totalitarianism, because these different organizations are saying, listen, the state is more important than the individual. The individual lives to serve the state. And I feel like in Western style democracies, it's really the other way around. It's the state exists to serve the individual. And then we get all of these byproducts of that. People pursue property rights and whatnot for their own individual benefit. And I think it's generally a better society. So conceptually, are we kind of on the same page?
So I think you're right in pretty much everything that you're saying, with the exception that I would say that states kind of tend towards that fascistic bent over time. Anyways, they tend to grow. But I would say, 90% of the way there. The big hole that you have, I think, is that you're viewing everything as a value structure that is assuming a consequentialist framework, right? Which is that you stated values. Right?
Well, hold on. How do you define consequentialism? Because it's important. Most people define consequentialism in it's okay if we end up killing a bunch of people because it serves the greater good. That's kind of consequentialism. But some people think just because I'm looking to maximize, looking to form a system that kind of maximizes good outcomes, that I'm a consequentialist. I'm not, because I don't think you can form a system that sacrifices individual rights by any means. So
Yeah,
I'm not a
so, I mean,
consequentialist.
you're probably a rule utilitarianist, which makes you a consequentialist. I doubt you're a deontologist. I mean, are you claiming you're not a consequentialist? What are you then? A virtue ethicist? A deontologist? What are you?
Look, I'm the definitions. I don't define myself as any one of those things. So, I mean, if you're trying to define me on the spot.
Well, no, you were. I just assumed you were. Most people are. You said I'm not, so I was curious what you would define yourself.
Let's work out the difference between consequentialists. Do you understand? Like, regardless of the philosophical terms, do you understand the two distinctions that I set forward? There are people that put consequences above how they get to those consequences. So if they have to do terrible things to achieve a good outcome, they will do that. That is my definition of a consequentialist.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little rough.
Putting the outcomes subservient to the process. Go ahead.
So let me get through this. So, like I said, you're probably a rule utilitarianist, right? Which is that you are a consequentialist, but you believe certain things are so bad that, like, you don't want to accept those certain things because you don't want to live in a world where those things are seen as okay, so long as the outcomes are morally preferable. Regardless, they're both forms of consequentialism. I have a certain soft spot for rule utilitarianism as being better than, like, a traditional consequentialism. But what I was saying originally, in terms of you describing the nature of the state and libertarianism, etc., is that you're describing values, right? You're describing ideals that people have. And what I think the important distinction about what makes a libertarian really a libertarian is that libertarianism is an ethical philosophy of natural law. It is a set of principles, namely the non-aggression principle, right? It is a line in the sand that says certain things are unjustifiable and therefore cannot be evaluated for morality. They are just always unjustifiable. They are logically incoherent, such as, for example,
well, hold on a second.
That it's good to tax people.
Hold on a second. So you're saying the non-aggression principle is not a moral principle. How are you defining morality?
So the thing that people often misunderstand about libertarianism is that libertarianism is descriptive, not prescriptive, right? So libertarianism doesn't...
You can't say that. What are you talking about? The non-aggression principle is prescriptive. The non-aggression principle is prescriptive.
It's not. It's
prescribing behavior.
No, it's not prescribing what one ought do. It does not. The non-aggression principle does not tell you what one ought do.
Okay, so are you saying it's like you're just? I mean, I guess in right. Are you just saying that, like, technically just the description of it is not necessarily saying you should do it? It's just describing what it is.
So what it is saying, the non-aggression principles, is if one is an aggressor, then they themselves cannot argue that they have rights in a logically coherent way, right? So you are stopped from arguing for your own rights. And by doing so, the only way that you can argue for your own rights again is to pay restitution. Now, some people, and this is up for debate, kind of will say that this kind of implies an ought not. And I, and I'm sympathetic to that, but at the same time, it still doesn't give you a moral ought. It does not give you a what one should do, right? So this is what kind of takes it out of the realm of being a prescriptive moral philosophy. Christianity.
Can you define non-aggression principle again? I missed it.
Oh yeah, sorry. I was kind of operating under the assumption we were collectively.
Well, I mean, I thought I had an understanding, but I've never heard this argument specifically. So.
Yeah, fair enough. So the non-aggression principle is a principle that it is unjustified, right? To aggress upon a person. And so to define aggression, we would say that aggression is to initiate force or fraud upon another person.
Right. But I mean, well, I guess I'm a little confused because when someone tells me something is unjustified, that seems to be a moral claim.
Yeah, it is a claim. It is a claim that it cannot be evaluated for morality. It is logically incoherent to claim that one ought to do something that is unjust.
Right.
It's a little bit different than saying something is evil, right?
Okay, so I guess I'm confused because, like, to me, what you're describing does sound like a moral prescription, but you're saying that it's not a prescription because it's just a logical fact of nature. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what makes it a description of natural law, right? So, I
Well,
mean,
but
it's grounded.
wouldn't an adherence to something just because logical? I mean, that's still a prescription. The idea that you should follow something that's logical.
Right. So let's say, let me back up. So let's say you say it is okay to beat up black people, right?
I would only say it's okay to beat up white people. Okay.
That's an interesting claim that you're making there.
Right. You know,
already, I see why you're friends with Andrew now.
Don't beat me.
Yeah, look, the 12% of me, just wants to
nice.
All right.
Okay. Anyway.
And so you say it's okay to beat up black people.
White people.
Logically, or white people. Sorry, it's logically okay. It's perfectly morally justified to beat up white people. In fact, white people are evil because historical oppression.
Why don't we do something that we would all agree on? It's
no. I like this. I like having these clips of him saying these words in this order.
Yeah. No, it's okay. I'll take it. It's fine, right? So you say that, right? And so the problem is that you now cannot argue, whatever race you are, Sitch, right? That I'm unjustified in doing the same thing to you, or maybe you are white, right? So now I get to go beat your ass. And when you say, hey, please don't beat my ass, I'm gonna go, well, you fucking argued for this, right? There's a contradiction, right?
Right.
And so, when you engage in that violence against white people, say you take it a step further, you start beating up random white people, and then someone else comes to beat you up, and you go, you can't beat me up. I don't want to be beat up, right? You're engaged in a performative contradiction, right? Like your actions are making the argument that it is okay to do this, and so you can't logically argue in the reverse.
Yeah, but nobody ever argues that way. They say it's okay to beat up poor people, and I'm not poor, therefore I can beat up poor people. Well, that's the way people argue.
Yeah, well, I agree in terms of that. Like, I think what you're saying, Scott, I think that's a good way to think about the world, and I would agree with that principle generally. I just don't think that's a fact of reality. That still is a moral prescription. That's still like an opinion that someone has.
I disagree. I think it's an objective fact, and it's laid out. So, like, you believe in Aristotelian formal logic.
Well, no, hold on. Let me finish for a second. Because I was going to say, anyone can create any framework where they say why it's okay for them to attack all white people. I mean, we hear this. I mean, this is kind of what we see on the far left right now. It's totally okay to be racist against white people, even though you can't be racist against black people because white people are, have power, and then they create the whole intersectional oppression Olympics, and they create all sorts of justifications for it and stuff. I don't agree with that. But to me, that's what's just, we have different opinions about what exactly is a moral behavior, what exactly is going to lead to a better outcome. I don't see that as being like a fact of the universe.
Yeah. So you believe in Aristotelian logic, right? We can start there.
Well, I'm an idiot, so I don't know what any of these terms mean. So
right. So you believe in like the law of identity, the law of the excluded middle, and the law of non-contradiction.
I'm an idiot. I don't know what any of these words mean.
Okay, A equals
A,
right?
and moral systems don't have to be logically coherent. You realize that, right?
Unfortunately, that is true. But
I mean, yeah, but that makes them wrong.
They can be
logically incoherent, but they're wrong.
in your moral framework, because you have a rule that moral systems must be logically coherent. Most people in the world do not have this rule in their moral systems.
Right.
Yeah, and that makes them wrong. Right, like I mean, like
can have a Christian would stand here and say, because you haven't accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, that your moral system is wrong.
Yeah, and if I was dealing with a hardcore Christian, I would start with existence exists, but like I don't feel that that's a necessary argument in this current.
I agree that, I think that people should, even though they often don't, prescribe to a moral system that is logical. I just think that the idea like when you personally accept that it has to be logical, an idea I agree with, that's a prescription already.
Yeah.
It's not a prescription. It's not a prescription to say that untrue things are untrue. Like, no, but it's prescribing a moral framework.
That's
right. But saying something is untrue is different than saying something has a logic or consistency to it, right?
Or saying that you should value truth.
Hold on, let me back up a little bit, because it seems like we're in the weeds here, right? Like,
okay.
I don't understand the argument here, other than to just pick apart what I'm saying, because like we all agree that a logically incoherent moral system is wrong, right? And
yes,
so
I agree.
if we all agree with that,
no, I'm not agreeing.
Well, okay, wait. When you mean like I think it's wrong, like
something
that
is definitionally false is not definitionally false.
We need to first define morality, Sitch. Otherwise, we're just going to
I guess this. Well, how are you define? Because I know we have like a really wacky definition of morality, but
are you adopting my definition of morality?
I define will for the sake of the conversation.
I define morality as a set of rules that binds individuals into a cooperative group. And you have a set of rules that binds you into libertarianism right now. You're saying one of those rules is that we must be logical. Everything must be logically coherent in our moral system. That's a rule in your moral system. Most moral systems don't have that rule, though.
I haven't laid out my personal moral system. I've only laid out libertarianism.
Okay.
Well,
how are you defining morality?
And by my definition, you can't have a personal moral system, because that would be a moral system that binds you into yourself.
Yeah, I don't really accept your definition, because
so what is
clear? I think it's very clear from your own show, right? That there are people that live in our society that have wildly different moral preferences.
Sure.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So
moral systems.
Right, but you're saying that I can't have a different set of moral preferences or moral beliefs by your definition.
No.
Yeah.
I think what Adam's saying is like an individual could have their own philosophical beliefs, but that the whole point, at least from where we look at morality, from kind of like an evolutionary group perspective, is that it is that humans evolved to have this concept of morality so that humans could work together in cooperative groups against nature, against other groups of people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting historical, evolutionary psychology take on why morals exist. I'm not sure that it necessarily helps define morality.
I was able to define it in a sentence.
Sure.
Okay, so I guess we should go to how are you defining morality?
I mean, I would define morality as a set of moral preferences or a system of moral preferences held by an individual or a group of people. Like it can be held. Like,
so what are the purpose of those principles?
So the purpose of those principles would be I guess what is the purpose of morality? We're getting really deep here. So it would actually depend upon the individual what their purpose for their moral system is. But overall, I think you could assume that a moral system is designed to explain and categorize and organize human behavior for the collective. Sure.
Okay.
So it's just to categorize things.
That would be the goal, though, right? Like, I mean, like the goal of a moral system would be for the moral system to be, logically, it would be for the moral system to be adopted by the most people, because you would want other people to follow your moral system. Right? Like,
right.
It doesn't help if I'm a socialist or if I'm, I don't know, if my moral system is pro-cannibalism, right? It doesn't help if I'm the only one, because it doesn't matter, right? Like
now you're making my argument. Here, I just looked up morality. It says concern with the distinction between good and evil, or right and wrong, right or good conduct.
Well, I don't want to have a conversation about like who has a better definition of morality because it's like who cares, whatever. I just want to try to understand what exactly Scott means when he says morality.
Right.
If the topic of like the prescription versus description thing isn't really that important to whatever the conversation is of the argument, we can just skip it. It was just something that you brought up and I didn't really understand.
No, I'm fine. I do agree that like a moral system is essentially meaningless unless you have, and unless an observer is holding that system, right? Like so, like if a moral system is held by two people in the woods, and like one person is saying what you're doing is wrong, well then you can kind of solve the problem by just murdering that person, because if there's nobody else and now it's just one person in the woods, then there's no judgment of good or evil. Right? Because that person's individual moral preferences just kind of wins. I mean, unless like God is part of the picture,
right?
God's watching. That's a separate conversation. So like, I'm fine with utilizing the framework for the most part. Yeah, I mean, I'll step into your framework. It's fine. I can do an internal critique.
Let's look at the system you set up already. Two people in the woods, right? Do you think two people in the woods working together will have a survival advantage over one person in the woods working alone?
I mean, I can't answer that because, obviously, like more likely, sure.
Okay. Yeah, it's more likely.
Like one person might be like, Bear Grylls or whatever, or something. And then like the other two people might be like, I don't know, two random lawyers we picked out of LA.
Bear Grylls is a faker though, so.
Well, the only situation where I could
even match,
the only situation where I think it could be a detriment and you could be better off going alone is if one person is, maybe morbidly obese or can't carry their own weight, or, you're ending up helping them more than they're helping you.
Right.
But I think as a general rule of thumb, the more people you have, if you have 3 people working together, if you have 5 people working together, if you have 10,000 people working together, you are going to have a distinct survival advantage. And I think the purpose of morality is to orient all of these people into a system that allows them to collaborate to face challenges in the environment. So when you're talking about a moral system that doesn't really serve any purpose other than to categorize people, I don't think it measures up to what morality evolved to do, or what morality even exists to do, to dictate right and wrong behavior in the pursuit of accomplishing goals.
Yeah, so I'm not really sure what your critique of my system is from your framework. Right, like libertarianism is ultimately like, is about conflict, reduction of conflict, right? Because
that's a useful thing.
It's an understanding, right, that conflict occurs between humans when people want to use scarce means for opposing ends, right? Which is to say, like you have this cup, right? It is your cup, and now I want to use the cup for another purpose, right? So conflict has occurred, and so how do we resolve that conflict? Well, there's only 3 ways to resolve any conflict of two individuals wanting to use scarce resources towards opposing. Number 1, you can fight, you can go to war, right? Number 2, you can argue, you can engage in argumentation to convince the other person that like your reason is better, right? Or number 3, one of the people can give up, right? Like one of them can just give up their claim. And so this is the kind of the point of of creation of private property and an understanding of bodily autonomy and anarchism, because it is the statist, right, that says that introduces a conflict creating system by creating the state that says that there is an arbiter that gets to use violence to force conflict resolution, that gets to use that force instead of argumentation, instead of voluntary processes. And so you kind of get what I'm saying. So like, I'm not sure where your critique about the collective is. Like, I do agree that collectives, tend to fill niches and tend to be better at facing challenges because people have different skills. I'm just not sure why that is like anti-libertarian. I completely agree.
Well, kind of moving away against the collective description definition thing, because I kind of want to get off that because I don't think it's that interesting. But what you said about the three ways of solving the problem, and then you said how introducing the state is with a monopoly on violence is kind of like a coercive force. I mean, I guess the issue is that I'm skeptical that most conflicts between people could be solved without some sort of, maybe not most, but a lot of conflicts cannot be solved without having a state or some kind of judge, some kind of external force that everyone has to basically agree to. Because a lot of conflicts,
I agree.
People can argue till they're blue in the face. They're not going to agree.
No, I agree.
Okay.
That's why I'm an anarchist.
I'm sorry, what did you say? You're not an anarchist?
No, that's why I'm an anarchist, right? Because we have private property rights, right?
Right.
And so, if one person, when you have no private property, right, for example, right, like your communist society, right, like this is the ultimate conflict inducing, right, because it requires constant conflict, right, and the state has solved some of this, right, by discovering private property rights and trying to create some level of conflict avoidance by saying one person has a right to this property and another person doesn't. But ultimately, the state apparatus is still creating arbitrary rules, is still stealing from people, et cetera. It's still creating conflict, right? That is unnecessary. Now, I agree that there needs to be like an intersubjective kind of like view of how we reduce conflict, right? That other people need to be communicated towards in those resolutions. But those systems can be private easily and without being conflict inducing.
So are you saying that for example, in a government or a system under anarchy, basically two people have a dispute, there would be some kind of external force to adjudicate, but it would be privately owned as opposed to a government?
Well, I mean, so we're stepping into the pragmatics away from the reality. And so I'm
trying to understand how what you're saying manifests.
Right? The right answer is it depends, right? So libertarianism, and this is where my own personal moral preferences step in, right? So in an ideal society that I envision, you would have rights enforcement agencies. Everyone that lived in the community would agree to a contract that basically says, if you want to run around this community, you have to have car insurance, except that insurance is legal insurance, right? And there's a competition of different companies that represent your rights. And if there is a need to arbitrate, then those companies will handle that out based off of voluntary contracts. But I mean, the Amish, for example, are another example of an anarchistic community. They're very close to anarcho-capitalism, other than the fact that they pay taxes. And they would have a council of elders, right? Like they would have their own system based upon their own moral beliefs and principles that would probably differ from mine.
So okay, let's with this example. So you live in a community, everyone signs a contract that says we're gonna abide by these rules, and we're gonna have this private firm basically be our adjudicator for any disputes. Now I assume there'd have to be some way of recourse, because it's it's possible if one person in the community becomes very, very rich, they could start buying off or bribing that whoever's adjudicating these things, and they could be corrupted, right? So there had to be some way to sort of change out those people.
Yeah. So what you're describing is a monopoly on this. It's not what I would prefer. I would prefer competing companies. What we currently have is a monopoly under the state, and you're right. The wealthy and the rich buy off, the ability to, of our legal system to be able to skirt the rules with regulatory capture and stuff like that. And it is a major problem because we have a monopoly on that system. What I would be talking about would be that, not everyone necessarily need sign Geico, right? Some people would have Nationwide. Some people would have, pick an insurance company. And what we find is that when insurance companies adjudicate with each other, they're way more efficient than when the court system is put up, right? Like when you rear end somebody or they rear end you in a car accident, the overwhelming majority of those cases don't go to court, right? They're handled between your insurance company and another insurance company, and everyone kind of agrees to the rules of the game in that way. So yeah, I mean, a rich person could buy up all the insurance companies, right? It is possible. Though I don't think that free markets tend that way. And I don't.
Okay,
think
so
that it
well,
would
maybe
actually
I
be
guess
helpful.
I guess I misunderstood because I thought you were laying out a system where like everyone that lived in the community had to abide by one thing, but you're saying like no, like every person could basically hire their own insurance slash adjudicator company. So like if I have Geico and you have Allstate and we get into some kind of dispute, some kind of financial dispute or something, our insurance companies would basically fight each other and,
Well, that's what
try
happens
to
now.
figure out.
I
Okay, that's
mean, it sounds
interesting.
silly, but that's what happens now in a car accident, right?
No,
Is
I
that like,
understand. I understand. Yeah, that's
you know,
interesting.
they both agree, and then eventually, if like you guys can't agree, it goes to litigation, right?
Mhm.
And then eventually it'll go to court. And the only difference between the current system of car insurance and property disputes in an anarcho-capitalist system that I'm kind of advocating for is that instead of going to the United States government to settle it as the final arbiter, both Nationwide and Geico agree to an arbiter, right? And then that arbiter is its own company that that makes that decision.
Mm. Okay, so there's going to be so our companies would fight each other, try to come to an agreement. If they can't, there'll be another company that's the arbiter of arbiters, essentially, that will they'll agree to abide by. Huh.
It sounds crazy, but it's not like we don't have this in our own system, right? Like a
Yeah, no,
court
yeah,
case goes
I
bad,
understand. I understand.
you go, you take it to the state Supreme Court.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the issues I see arising in this would be, I would imagine, I mean, the same problem definitely exists in our current system where, obviously we can talk about someone who's poor, they get like a public defender, and public defenders suck. And if someone's rich, they give like the high price lawyer. But I assume that like that problem would just replicate in the system that you're prescribing.
Yeah, I'm not arguing for a utopia. I think that's the different, right? You know what I mean? Like I don't think that there will like that everything that I advocate for will magically solve problems. And in fact, I don't know what the best system of justice is. If I was, I would be a godlike lawyer of some fashion, right? What
would the best system of justice achieve?
What would the best system of justice achieve? Perfect.
Yeah, when you say the best system of justice, what's the goal?
I mean, like the ideal endpoint, which is likely like an asymptote, right? Like you probably never reach it, right? But the ideal end goal would be perfect restitution for all crimes with 100% accuracy, and minimal or zero, I guess, zero cost, right? Like I don't know that that's possible in any fashion, but I do know that if you bake into your system violations of human rights, such as taxes, that you're not getting closer to that goal.
Why not?
Yeah.
Why? Well, I mean, I guess we could look at it from a variety of different angles. Number one, it is impossible to get to that goal potentially, but but I don't know that, right? So it may be possible to achieve a system that has perfect justice and perfect restitution. And in that situation, a system of taxation that is involuntary is definitionally worse, no matter what, even if they achieve the same outcome, because one system requires a violation of people's rights and the other doesn't. The other thing is that, well, I guess I'll just stick with that argument.
Taxation is a violation of people's rights in your moral system, but it's not a violation of people's rights in all moral systems.
Well, you yourself agreed that a moral system can't be contradictory and untrue in order for it to be true. That if it's false, it's wrong.
No, I never agreed to that. What are you talking about? I told you that.
So you believe
moral systems don't have to be logically coherent. I would argue, actually, if we took most moral systems around the world and looked at them, we would find that they are not logically coherent. The idea,
probably.
The idea of science and empiricism and all that came pretty late in the game. Developing moral systems was very early on. And actually, I would argue that you can probably devise better moral systems, like as defined by not searching for truth, but solving problems in the world. If you're not constrained by objective truth. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, there's two problems with moral systems.
Hold on.
No, hold on. Let me just real quick here. There's two problems with moral systems. Okay. I'm defining morality as a set of rules that binds people into a cooperative group, right? So we have this set of rules. That's the first problem. What are the rules that we're all going to follow? What is the best set of rules for us to define for society to get the best outcomes, the most happy people, the most productive society, whatever you want to do? The goals obviously are subjective for many people. But then the second problem is enforcement of the rules. Because you always got people who are going to be like, hey, I don't really like these rules. I will follow my own set of rules. I will follow a set of rules that works more for me and less for society as a whole. So the enforcement mechanism is important. Now, evolutionarily, people kind of came up with the concept of God, this all-seeing, all-knowing individual that will do terrible things to you if you don't follow the rules. That was their initial enforcement mechanism. But in modern societies, we have things like police and judges and nosy neighbors and HOAs. That's how people enforce the rules now. So, do you understand that principle?
Well, I don't know that you're stating a principle per se. I think what you're stating is an evolutionary view of why we have certain incoherent or inconsistent things, because they have some level of utility in establishing order.
It's a description of basically how morality works. But your system, what you're saying is the enforcement mechanism for my system is logic. Things that are logically incoherent, people will not do. And I think what I'm saying is I'm not certain that really matters to a lot of people, and that's a very good enforcement mechanism. I mean, you kind of have, if you're going to say we can dissolve the state.
You've gone on for
yeah. Go ahead. I'll let you respond.
And you're saying that your morals and your moral framework doesn't need to be logically consistent. And you're saying that that's okay if it serves a certain utility. I'm not really sure why you took issue with me calling you a consequentialist, because it's like textbook consequentialism. Because I am saying this as a description of the world. I'm not talking about my own personal moral system. Okay. All right. Fair enough.
I'm saying as a description of the world, there are all of these different competing moral systems that all have different outcomes. And if I look at that, all of those moral systems, many of them are not logically coherent. Of course, I would like my moral system to be logically coherent. I'm like a science and evidence guy.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out. So I said that they're wrong and that we should eschew away from them. You agree, but you're still saying that because they exist.
Well, no, hold on a second.
I don't understand what your argument is. Like, your argument is that inconsistent moral frameworks, that people have beliefs that are logically unsound, and that's okay. And I'm saying, well, they're wrong, and you're taking issue with me saying they're wrong by restating the premise that they exist.
Well, let me see if I can to explain this. I think what Adam's trying to get at is, well, first of all, when you said wrong, it sounded like you were laying out like that you're not just saying like wrong, like I don't agree with it. You were saying like they're wrong, and like there's a universal wrongness to the existence of these things, which that was the first thing that Adam was taking contention with. And the second thing he was taking contention with, which I think was the key factor, is he's saying from what you're describing, you're saying that the enforcement mechanism of your moral system is this idea that it's logically consistent. And Adam's saying that is not an enforcement mechanism that he thinks most people will abide to, essentially.
Well, I also think there are different moral systems to achieve different goals. Like, I would define science as kind of a moral system, but the goal of science is not survival and reproduction. So the goal of science is kind of sussing out objective truth.
Right.
So if you're a scientist and you opt into this moral system, the set of rules that you're abiding by are things like evidence, honesty, sharing your work with other scientists. There's all these sets of rules. But most moral systems are not designed to seek objective truth. Most moral systems are designed to survive and reproduce, right?
Yeah, so I mean, moral systems are kind of like guidelines for a set of values and goals, right? Whereas ethics are a set of rules and behavior for determining, right and wrong, which is
Well,
kind of
I'm
like,
not.
there's a distinction between ethics and morals here.
I don't
And I
make the
think-
distinction though. So
Okay, well then you just kind of disagree with philosophy 101. I don't know what to tell you.
yeah, I do.
Okay.
I think philosophy needs to be biologicized. I think evolutionary
What the fuck
psychology.
does that mean?
Well, I think evolutionary psychology should replace philosophy. I don't think philosophy is a good way of determining truth.
Well, I don't know how to necessarily engage with someone that doesn't believe that they need to be grounded in logic or truth or objective reality, and instead would prefer to do a historical analysis of psychological development to determine right and wrong. It's kind of difficult because that is essentially just a might makes right argument.
Well, wait a minute. Again, Adam's position is not that he doesn't think things should be rooted in objective fact. His contention, again, is that he's saying it sounds like you're saying that your moral system works because it's rooted in objective fact, and he's saying that doesn't matter.
It's not true. Yeah.
Okay, so if Adam, if you're saying that it needs to be, or that it should be rooted in objective fact, then you're talking about philosophy, right?
Sure, but like I said, like if your moral system is something like science and your goal is objective truth, then that's fine. I completely agree that it should be rooted in things like logic and evidence, empiricism. These different forms of philosophy, I think, are useful. What I am saying is, most people think of morality as a way to live their lives, and they're not particularly interested in knowing the truth value of certain claims.
Right, which is, it's so weird. You want to put ethics into that category when it suits you, and then separate ethics when it doesn't suit.
Well, no,
I stated at the very beginning that libertarianism.
But that's unfair because I've told you
It's not
specifically.
unfair.
Look, you're the one that's separating ethics and morality. Okay, I don't feel that the distinction is important to the argument that I'm making. Define the difference between ethics and morality so we can know your definitions.
Okay, so morality is a set of guiding principles. They both deal with determining right from wrong, right? Whereas morality is a set of preferences that individuals have that align with their guiding principles, their moral. Well, I can't use the word in the definition, it's circular, but their values, right? Their subjective values that they want to see in the world. Whereas
so you're separating. Just to be clear here, you're separating morals as preferences and ethics as some sort of objective behavior that you should participate in.
I'm separating. We didn't get to ethics, right? Like I'm separating ethics as like the rules or actions regarding behavior. Right. So
for what purpose?
So like, well, they do commingle, right? But they are still separate things, right? It's a similar thing with like female versus woman, right? Like they're inexorably linked in many ways, but they are different things, and that's why they're different words, right? Like ethics is dealing with like it is wrong to I don't know, murder somebody's dog, right? Like this is a behavior. This is an action that is occurring, and we deem it to be wrong for certain reasons, right? And then there's like the morality of the situation that the virtue ethicist looks at this and says it is wrong to do that because that's not brave, and because it's the consequentialist might look at it and say that they might say it's right because it's brave. The consequentialist looks at it and says that we don't want to live in a world where everyone's killing dogs. People are less happy because of that, right? The objectivist might look at that and say that is their neighbor's property, right? Like this is really getting into the weeds, and I'm not really sure why we're there. But I
can tell. So the reason, so I agree. First of all, I would like to get off of arguing definitions because it gets you're right. It gets in the weeds. It gets boring.
But the reason I use accepted definitions, like
no, I listen. I understand the reason that we keep getting sidetracked believe the reason we keep getting sidetracked is because it feels like either Adam or you will say something, and then one of us feels like there's some kind of concept smuggled into the definition that we don't agree with.
Yeah,
and then
totally.
we get sidetracked onto this side quest of going down the definition pathway.
I promise I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to use like
no, it's not like I don't think it's like intentional. I think it's
definitions.
just it's a nature of like because we're using different words. There are always going to be different concepts that we don't agree with smuggled in to the definition. But we'll try to. I don't like we can try to back up because I don't remember how we got off on this tangent in the first place.
Well, I would just say I'm you separating ethics and morality, which I know some people do. I think I don't prefer to do that because I think it overcomplicates the issue. I am only talking about behavior, right and wrong behavior.
It's really important for libertarianism, right? That ethics and morality, that we use accepted definitions for those, right? That is like kind of the, because libertarianism is a descriptive, ethical, legal framework that doesn't give moral oughts. I think that might be where the trip up is that if you're denying the separation between ethics and morality, it's two separate things, right? Then you're saying that by us saying it is logically incoherent to do these things and they're conflict-inducing things, but that we're not giving you moral oughts, you're saying you're not allowed to do that, and I'm presenting a system that does that.
So you're making the distinction between ethics as morality gives oughts and ethics doesn't give oughts. It's just descriptive. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, there are other differences, such as the others that I laid out before, but that is also a difference, right? Is that because natural law is a governing set of principles that adhere to logic, right? They don't tell you what you can or ought do. The Christian tells you how to act forthrightly and morally in the world. Right? The communist tells you to do the same thing. The libertarian says, look, I'm not allowed to use aggression or violence or force, whatever word you want to use, to stop you from doing that thing, even if me and my community disagree with you and think that what you're doing is morally wrong. Like a sex worker, right? Many libertarians would say OnlyFans girls are just whores that are, slatterns that are putting their body on display, contributing to the degeneracy of society without actually offering anything helpful. But I don't have a right to have the police kick down your door and stop you from doing this form of prostitution just because I think it's morally wrong, right? And if we put those two together and we have to marry those concepts, then what you're saying is that opinion can't exist, and I assure you it does.
Well, it is in my framework. It exists only as an opinion, though. I think you are giving moral prescriptions. You're just, since you have this libertarian mindset where you don't want to say this is how you ought to do things because it goes against your moral sensibilities, then that makes it very difficult to make a moral system. So that's what I perceive as the difficulty.
We're not giving a moral system. We're giving an ethical framework.
I know.
Right? There's a difference between the two, right? And that's what I just elucidated.
I contest that claim. So,
all right, fair enough. When you go on Adam and Sitch, you think you're going to get to dunk on lefties, and instead I'm sitting here arguing the definition of morality and ethics for fucking 20 minutes, and I appreciate.
Well, wait a minute. You brought. I thought the name of your stream wasn't it something like bringing libertarianism to Sitch and Adam or something?
Oh yeah,
right?
but libertarianism through everything.
No, right, but I'm saying like it's not like you're like, hey, here's this issue about lefties. Let's talk about this. Let's dunk on them. I'm like, yeah, no, you brought this up. This is your fault, Scott.
My chat keeps telling me to bring up Jangles because I fucking destroyed him in modern day debates, and they're like, they hate Jangles. Just bring.
Oh, recently?
Jangles.
Well, no,
it's like 6 months ago, maybe.
About wait, what was the topic?
It was like queer theory or like grooming in schools. And nice. I just opened up reading and explaining queer theory and he was like, what? Who are these people? I don't understand this. Like, let's talk about Disney movies. And I was like, no, dog, we're talking philosophy and social emotional learning. And I'm going to fuck. My chat is like, bring it up. It'll save you. And I'm like,
first of all, thank you, chat. But secondly, so I can predict the conversation because we had a conversation with him about CRT that I can assume went very similar, which is that you were like, oh, queer theory has all this like really shady shit rooted into it. And you're like, here's all these founding queer theorists and people involved, and they said all this shady shit about age of consent and all, overturning heteronormativity and blah 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 blah. And he's all like, no one cares about these old dead philosophers, or even if they're still alive, no one cares about those people. That's not what anyone means. They mean queer theory.
Yeah, he was like, you brought up. He was like, what does Gail Rubin have to do with anything? And I'm like, she wrote the foundational document for queer theory. What the fuck are you
right?
So chat that was chat that was like, bring it up.
Right. Someone said because I basically had the same conversation with him some time ago about CRT, or same thing. I'd bring up like, here's something that some guy said in CRT that's like really anti-white, or talks about how we have to live in an anti-liberal society where we treat each different races as different nation states, and he's all like, no, that's not what CRT is. I read a Wikipedia article and something. Right. But someone said, there was a super chat. Someone said, Christian Baller says, you look like Jangles. I hate to.
I mean, all right, whatever.
I hate to tell you that. Okay. Very shame on you, Christian.
I mean, I don't care. Make fun of my looks. It's okay.
BMO for $20 says, why does your guest look like Jesse Cox with black hair?
Who's Jesse Cox?
I don't even know who Jesse Cox is. So I don't know if that's an insult or a compliment.
I don't know.
Let's take it as a compliment.
I'll take it as a compliment.
Anyway.
He doesn't seem like a bad looking guy. And since I'm
a
sworn enemy of Jangles, Jangles looks like the devil incarnate to me. So.
True. Jangles is a very bad faith actor.
Hold on. I'm going to get into my right wing mode, and I'm going to put on a hat. Because as you know, all right wing streamers have to wear hats. I don't have a beanie currently available.
Do you consider yourself a right winger?
I consider myself mostly right wing. I would say I'm more right wing than most people online that call themselves right wing, because economically I'm a staunch. So like economically, I'm more right wing than like any of these fucking conservative people, because I'm anarcho-capitalist. In terms of my personal moral preferences in like how society ought be, I'm probably more right wing. I do have some degenerate kind of views, such as, like when it comes to like drugs, for example, like I think everybody should try shrooms and LSD and DMT.
Based.
You know what I mean? Like, so I have like some things that like are, leftist in that regard, or left wing. But yeah, I'm probably pretty hardcore right wing.
Nice.
Which is the big difference between but I'm also an anarchist, right? And so like things that are traditionally considered to be right wing, I would say aren't right wing. They're just statist. But like being like, let's say pro cop, right? Like I don't give a fuck about cops. They're all oath breakers, right? Like they have no honor. They're mercenary sellswords for the state. And people see that and they're like, oh, you're like a leftist. And I'm like, no, I want private cops. Like it's very different.
Right, but you just don't like cops because they like, if it was the same thing but a private company, you would like it. It's just because
there's more security guards than there are cops. So
sure.
Yeah. I think we should empower security guards. I think that's the best way to get rid of cops. Yeah.
What is like the root principle here about why is it being private so much better to you than it being the government?
So I think like a basic stepping aside from like going back into the shit storm of like the morality, I think like I think the state's theft is unjustified, right? But if we want to look at it just from like a consequences framework, right? I think that it follows kind of the same problems that Hayek first illustrated with the local knowledge problem, right? And then was perfected more so by Mises in the economic calculation problem, which is that like even at a local level, the state's rules just don't make sense, right? Like I think there's a certain understanding that a community has needs. A community has a need for protection, a need for security, a need for someone to get rid of a criminal element, and there's this hierarchical structure from on high that is like democratically established by like moneyed interests and like Karen's soccer moms that like go to vote from their gated community on like how we should handle like the poor side of town. It just doesn't make sense. And so it creates all of these additional problems because you have all of these competing interests for local security needs. And so I just think fundamentally people handling their own security and protecting their own property, which in this regard would likely be landlords in low income areas, right? Protecting their property is just more efficient at fixing the actual fucking problem, especially once you add like the drug war and all of these things that have just done nothing but create problems.
Well, I guess, I mean, the way that I think about it is that, everyone is shitty and they're basically motivated by their incentives. And so like with government, everyone, the politicians, they're all motivated by winning elections. And obviously, what constitutes winning elections can change, and that can obviously lead to corruption, as it generally tends to do. But with private companies, the incentive is obviously just to make money. And to me, it's like, well, there could be some efficiency that you gain in some certain areas, but it's basically like we're just switching out one incentive for another incentive that's going to have its own problems that I feel like has been the problems that have like kind of dictated a lot of human history before we got to kind of like liberal democracies.
In capitalism, how do you make money?
Generally by providing a good or service that you can sell for higher than it costs to make or produce.
Right. So by solving problems, right? Like that's essentially how you make money is you solve problems, right? You discover a new way to
Well,
fix
I mean, I wouldn't
something.
define it that way because often you can give a product or service that people didn't know they needed or was a problem until they decided that until they wanted it, so they saw that it existed, right?
Right. Well, they provided some level of value, right, to people,
right.
and people wanted that thing. So, I mean, like it may not have been a problem before, it may have introduced a problem. But nevertheless, they've provided some value, right? The police state as it currently exists, they don't have that incentive. As a matter of fact, police don't have a constitutional authority. They don't have a constitutional mandate to protect citizens, right? Whereas a contract might, or a contract might not, right? But like the current system is not incentivized by actually providing the good or service. So like you're saying like, well, I could see other problems being occurring because they're just trying to make a profit. And it's like, yeah, sure. But the best way that you compete in a market against your competitor is to provide that service at its lowest cost or at a quality that is worth the cost, right?
You don't think politicians are competing to keep crime low?
To a certain extent, I would say that local politicians are competing to keep crime, but most of them
hold on. We're in the middle of a Republican election, a Republican nomination for the presidency. You don't think when the debates happen next month, the Republican candidates are going to come out and say crime is terrible and I will eliminate it?
I think I've seen a lot of fascistic rhetoric from the Republican right in terms of how they want to deal with crime. I mean, you have like Vivek Ramaswamy.
Hold on.
We should drone Mexico. Yeah.
Is it so?
Based.
When you say fascistic, is it fascistic to eliminate crime?
No, I didn't say.
So then why are you saying it's fascistic rhetoric then?
Well, I gave a specific example, like, starting fucking wars in Mexico to continue the drug war.
Okay.
I think
but just specifically
Donald Trump's
on crime.
plan for specifically, like he put out a tough on crime kind of like packet, right? And some of the things in there I absolutely agreed with, right?
Well, isn't that a market? Look, they're literally competing for who will be better. They're going to come out with different policy proposals for eliminating crime. People are going to listen to those policy proposals and they are going to vote accordingly. How is that not a market?
I mean, it's a bit of a bastardization of a market when you have a winner take all scenario in an election system where, people like RFK, for example, aren't even going to be allowed to run. Like there's a lot of unfree market principles here that obviously isn't true.
We can't pursue multiple conflicting policy prescriptions for eliminating crime. That's why it's a winner take all market.
Well, yeah, that's why it's bad. That's why we should open up private security firms that have competition.
Yeah, but I guess from that perspective, it's like that's kind of what's happening when you have different local areas of the country are governed differently. They do have different enforcement and judicial policies, and people can look at it and say which one's working, which one's not working. Right now, obviously, that gets tied into politics, and people aren't going to necessarily look at it from like a factual, logical perspective. But
yeah, no, I mean, I think the great experiment of liberalism, right? Is an interesting one in exactly, especially when you talk about a constitutional republic like the US, is interesting because it does add a kind of a sense of not necessarily competition or markets, but it does mean that there are states and localities with different rules that kind of, in a way, get to be a test lab for ideas and policies, right? And so it is, and there is something kind of like a market to that understanding that there isn't like a authoritarian dictatorship that creates one rule that must be the same across the land. That doesn't make it a market. It might make it better than, let's say, North Korea. Like, yeah.
Well, I guess like what is the difference specifically that you're trying to lay out here? Because I'm not seeing it.
What is the difference between
market? Like if you're in one, like what's the difference between having a bunch of different communities that all hire different security services to provide different levels of security versus people electing different officials that then enforce different rules and regulations for security?
Well, okay, so number one, people elect representatives to in America, at least if we stick with an American politics.
Right.
They elect representatives with a one man, one vote system. So right off the bat, that's very different than a market, right? Because if I deeply believe in something, I can invest a lot of money. If I don't believe in something, I invest less money. If I have more money, I can invest more money, which is to say that there's a certain meritocratic ideal that those that have achieved a lot of success have more buying power in the market than those that have achieved less success.
This has a parallel in elections because people can spend money on advertising to persuade people and win more people over to their argument. So that even takes place.
Yeah, to a lesser degree, but for sure, right? Like, like Michael Bloomberg coming in Virginia and swinging the state blue because he like dumped in like $200 million. It was crazy. But like, but there is still this one man, one vote system, right? There's a lot of people that don't participate. And this would also be true in a market system. So, I mean, that's a fair. But the big thing is that when you elect a representative on a majority take all situation, you have 49% losers and 51% winners, right? Whereas in a market system, when you have 51% that want one thing and 49% that want another thing, now, depending on the community that you're in, you might have both, right? You might have companies that are working within competition within the community because one prefers company A and one prefers company B. You don't get that in our system. And you might not get what you voted for. And I think most Americans will realize that often they don't get what they were promised, what they were voted for. And the presidents aren't charged with fraud, right? Whereas like when you're a business and you defraud people, you owe restitution. When Trump says, I'm going to do something and then it doesn't happen, well, then it's just like, oh, well, the deep state, and then you just kind of forgive them.
Well, I mean, I'd say that's a little more complicated because any president could be held accountable for fraud if people wanted them to be held accountable for fraud. It's just that they don't because everything becomes so hyper-partisan because what one side calls fraud, the other side denies exists in the first place. But to go back,
maybe when you try and challenge those people, you get kangaroo courts around January 6th things from things created by feds and people end up in prison for 18 months in solitary confinement.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Maybe there's another reason we don't tar and feather politicians. It's because we don't want to die.
Well, I don't agree with that. But moving, I want to go back to what you said before, which is how, like, it seems like it'd be complicated to have, like, for example, if there's like a 1 square mile area of a city and you have like 49% of the people have, they've hired one security firm with one set of laws and 51% have hired a different security firm with a different set of laws. Like, I don't understand how you could have two different legal systems competing in the same physical location. Like, how do you follow what laws?
We have that today to an extent, right? Which is that, like the Jews the Hasidic Jews in New York have their own police and ambulance service because of the inadequate. Now, granted, It's kind of more like a Medicare Part D system, which is that they're tacking on additional services that the state isn't providing. And I'll give you that.
Yeah, that's not really what I'm talking about.
But I mean, if company A has like jurisdiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then company B has, let's say we create a town, right? And we'll do it like this. So town has 2 companies, right? And this is the whole city, right? Pointed out here, right? Company A is in charge of this. Company B is in charge of this. Someone living over here wants to procure the services of company B, right? Now, how does that work? Because they've already established territory. Well, at a certain point, company B is going to recognize, and company A is going to recognize that, let's say, a criminal that they need to charge runs into the other person's jurisdiction. So what do? Are they not allowed to? Do they inform company B? How does that work? Well, it would behoove both company A and company B to provide the best service regardless.
Right, to work together. Right, yeah.
Right,
but that's not, I guess.
To work together and be like, okay, well, if someone runs into your area, like we have permission to chase them. That makes their product more valuable. Right.
But that's not what I was referring to. I guess, and I guess it's confused because like I could understand a concept where different companies have different locations that they have control over. But I thought your critique and your criticism of like voting is you were saying like, oh, if you lose the vote, you essentially get nothing. And so I thought you were saying that in the same physical location under the system you're talking about, you could have 2 different legal systems coexist and maintain order. So if you lost the vote, you could still buy your own security service that would imply their rules wherever you physically exist. And that's where I was confused about.
Let's say I'm a landlord in this company, right? Well, I recognize that like, because I have all of these tenants, and let's say I'm a slumlord, fuck it, right? I have these tenants and they cause problems, but it's cheap, right? So I might hire like a cheap security firm that only comes in when someone is being so rowdy and raucous that it's like causing a problem for other people. But ultimately, I don't really give a fuck what you do in the parking lot, et cetera. So it's a cheap security service. And this is owned by company A, right? Now, company A doesn't have any right initially to deny another company from moving in and being in charge, from like using roads, right? Unless they own the roads. You know what I mean? Like, so there is a certain way where you could monopolize areas, but at a certain point, like the inefficiencies in the market would likely crumble that monopolistic tendency.
Well, no, I wasn't really talking about I'm trying to like, because it seems like you have a system like where kind of the example you were given where, you know, the slumlord, you know, they say like, oh, well, in the building or at a certain time, I'm going to hire security company A, and security company A has these laws that the people have to essentially abide by. And then tomorrow they hire security company B, which has a completely different set of laws. Yes. It seems like it'd be very strange if like the laws could just switch on a daily basis, you know, to suit, you know, whoever owns the property at whatever specific time that they want.
Security company A has Pride Year, and security company B has made Pride illegal as conversion therapy year.
So let's say I'm the slumlord of this apartment complex, right? I hire security company A. Security company A is really lax, and they don't care what you do so long as you're not violent towards other tenants or you're not like extremely loud, right?
Right.
But bunch of white people move into the neighborhood and start gentrifying the neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the property values are going up, and I don't fucking like that this slum is full of a bunch of people that are like low socioeconomic status people. So they all have leases, and I have to abide by those leasing agreements. But I understand here in the future, I want to do some modeling and renovations, and I want to charge higher rent because the area around me is worth more money and my property is worth more, and I want to invest money and time into it. That also means that I, as the landlord, am probably going to hire a new security firm. But the rules that were established beforehand in the leasing agreement, which is a, you know, a title transfer that would revert back to the landlord. It says like, you know, these are the things you can and can't do. So I hire a new security company because over time I'm going to start replacing these low socioeconomic status people, right, with gentrified people. We'll call them, we'll call them whatever you want to call them, right? So the people that are willing to pay more money, and so I need a better security service. It's up to me, the private property owner, to then say there's no drugs allowed at my place. You're going to once a month have a maintenance inspection that looks for pests, right?
Mm-hmm.
The old rules didn't have those kind of things that you don't like, but the new tenants like the new rules. And so long as the process is voluntary, if you can't afford the new place and you don't like the new rules, then when your lease is up and you go move somewhere else.
Right. But I feel like that's not like the scenario that you laid out. I don't think that's what would happen. I think what would happen would be as soon as the area starts to become gentrified, the slumlord says, "Oh, I'm switching to security company B," and security company B says that drugs are illegal, and suddenly he uses that as an excuse to basically kick everyone out and just switch up the rules on them.
I mean, it's possible, but that would be fraud, and that's where
well, no, it'd only be fraud if in the original contract it's stipulated that the slumlord could not switch up security firms, until some specific time or the contract expires. Which I don't see why any slumlord would ever put that in a contract ever for any reason.
In the example we're giving, I don't understand why a security firm would create laws, right? Like they're there to enforce private property and the will of the private property.
Well, I thought
you would have a contract just like you do now that says what is and isn't allowed, right? Like even today, there are places that say no pets, and then there are places that don't give a fuck, right?
Right.
So like a new security firm can't come in and then just start saying, well, there's all these new rules, because under a system of libertarianism, technically speaking, you are the owner of your apartment. And if you violate the things in the contract, the title of transfer reverts back to the landlord. Like you sign a contract that says, this is my apartment and I agree to do these things in order to keep this apartment. Once you stop doing those things, the title transfer back to the landlord.
I guess under that system, I don't see why a slumlord would write any protections at all into any contract for its tenant.
It would be fucking stupid for you to move there.
Yeah, but if we're talking about slumlords, right? We're talking about people that have to get what they can get. They're not really going to be being able to compete on the marketplace.
Yeah, and just like today, there are problems and there are shitty people, right? Like I'm not arguing that this will be a utopia. I'm arguing.
No, I understand, but I'm saying to me,
I
understand what you mean, but I'm saying to me, this is sort of why, or one of the reasons why I think you do need a non-profit driven state that is saying, listen, we need to create some kind of framework of rules that applies to everyone equally, regardless of their, situation.
Then go live in a covenant community that has that. There's nothing wrong with living in a community that voluntarily has a system of governance that all the people there agree is preferable, that has those arbiters set in. That's a covenant community. This is perfectly aligns with the libertarian view of anarcho-capitalism. What doesn't is a nation state that gained its land via conquest and then forces its born natives into subjugation to an arbitrary set of rules that they have no say in, and then later they get a majority say in because you just inherited this.
I see. So you're saying just the basis of the fact that people don't get the choice in the first place is the key issue.
I just don't ascribe to this Rousseau social contract theory. If you want to recreate Florida in Florida exactly the way Florida is, be my guest, right? But you have to obtain that property voluntarily.
Right.
But homesteading or purchasing.
What I'm saying is, it sounds like the key thing is that it's no one gets to choose. If you say oh, well, you can go do that, it's well, you can't go do that because basically every piece of land is claimed by a country already, right? So if we live in a theoretical,
move to the 7 kilometers in Lieberland,
right? If we lived in a theoretical magical universe where there was infinite land, right? This wouldn't be an issue because people could just go move somewhere else and create their own community. But since we don't, that's the problem, is that people are basically born into a country and have to abide by the rules that are already set up, right?
Yeah, I mean, it would still be an issue in the sense that the state has committed massive crimes of which it can't even fathomably pay back restitution for. For example, the Cherokee, right? That's just a crime against humanity that America did, right? Because they wanted more cotton land, right? Those things demand restitution.
Sure. I mean, I guess I don't see how a private system would not do all the same things, I guess. I mean, because the way I look at it is like, and maybe this is a contentious thing, and this is kind of like where we get into like the, the whole Mencius Moldbug thing. I mean, I think you could look at like to an extent, and this is kind of the argument that I've literally heard pro monarchists make, is that like a monarchy is essentially, a private run system where one person is like, their land and they get to dictate all the rules there. So it's hard for me to imagine that a privately owned system isn't going to just recreate all the problems we have today.
So, I mean, in monarchy is very close, right, to a privately owned system. And, I mean, if you read Democracy, the God That Failed, anarchism is preferable, always, obviously. But he makes a pretty good argument as to why non-parliamentary monarchies were better systems than liberal democracy. The problem that I have, and this is where the psychology thing that I think Adam will enjoy. My biggest critique of Hoppe on Democracy, the God That Failed, is that that was true before the invention of communism, and that the ideology and the psychology that exists behind that ideology has allowed for dictators to do things that they never were really able to ever do before. So I don't know that a modern monarchy would actually be better than a liberal democracy in terms of like a consequential analysis.
I'm sorry, the argument is that the modern psychology allowed dictators to do something that they wouldn't in the past?
Yeah, I think the invention of the ideology of communism has allowed dictators to get away with things and convince their people that like it's okay to to kill all the kulaks, for example. You know what I mean?
I don't know. Like you're talking about the you're talking about like you're talking about like the Cherokee. I mean, that was the people wiping out Native Americans was long before communism.
Well, of course, but what I'm saying is that absolute monarchies before as they were historically operated in many. The biggest weakness of the absolute monarchy was the justice system, right? Is that there was a completely unfair system of justice,
right?
And the king had a decree. But there are advantages to the monarchy, which is sometimes the advantage of dictatorships too, which is that the monarchist, the king, right? They are a low time preference in many of their economic decisions, right?
Right.
Which is that they're not elected for 4 years and trying to get rich quick, and then they don't really give a fuck what happens to the country after that. They're looking at the country as, this is my entire life, and this is what I pass on to my children. And so the monarchist is not, the king is not incentivized to inflate the currency, create pyramid Ponzi schemes like fucking Social Security and things like that will destroy the currency and will destroy the country 30, 40 years later, because they'll still be king or their kid will be king. Right. So there are some advantages.
I completely disagree.
Yeah, we completely disagree with this. I mean, I'll be honest. I tried to read the Hopi book, the Hoppe book. I couldn't get through it because it was very boring. But I completely disagree with that concept, and we've heard a lot of people tell us this, because like that would be true if the king was Superman and didn't actually was just king and the universe declared it so, and they didn't actually have to worry about not being king. But as we know in reality, that's not the case. The king has to contend with all these different factions of power that they continually have to make happy in order to maintain their power. They have all these nobles, all these different brokerage firms, all this different money and money issues that they have to deal with. They're not just dictated king forever by reality. And so very oftentimes the king is going to be making lots of short-term decisions based on making the various factions they have to make happy.
Yeah, I mean that is also also in Democracy That God That Failed. He also talks about
So what is the?
I mean,
so then how is what you're saying true? Then I guess
how did democracy fail? What's like?
Before we get to how democracy failed, if that's the case, if the king has to address all these things on a short-term timescale just as much as any other form of government, then I guess I don't understand the long-term
there's no difference.
time preference argument.
Again, I started this off by saying that I don't agree 1-to-1 with Hoppe, so I'm
Right.
defending Hoppe's work.
If you just say that you don't agree with it, it's fine.
Right. I mean, like, but I do
Okay.
agree with it to some extent, which is that I do think if you were to do an analysis, at least from a historical analysis, you know, the waste of the government has grown under liberal democracy, for sure. Right. The amount of wealth.
I know we're defining all of these terms
economy
completely differently.
I don't agree with that at all. I mean, hasn't the amount of the net wealth has increased drastically? The net wealth for each individual person has gone up drastically.
Right. And also industrialization occurred, right? Like, I don't want to sound like a commie here, but like there are other factors such as time, right?
No, but like even when the industrial age happened, right? There was still massive inequality until, you know, the middle class kind of emerged. And I guess there's a lot of contention about why the middle class emerged. Was it just because of World War II, or was it because there were government policies in place that kind of channeled money and incentivized behavior in a specific way?
It's hard to know. I mean, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you know,
Right.
Engels, for example, in Socialism, Scientific and Utopian, would argue that like the philosophy of materialism spread to the middle class, and the industrial sector, you know, created an anti-nobility gentry, that, you know, bourgeoisie that reinstituted God, et cetera. So that's one argument I disagree with personally. I mean, there's also just like, you know, a certain growth in middle class rights that was inevitable, that was really sparked by the bubonic plague, and the value of labor being increased because of population differences.
Well, I accept that.
The Magna Carta and moves forward. But I think there's a lot of different reasons why. You know what I mean? Like it's a difficult to. That's the problem with when you look at economics in the view of anything other than praxeology, is that you put together a bunch of things and then you can create a historical fact that these things occurred and then these economic things occurred. You can't necessarily draw a 1-to-1 right causation from those things. You can just know that those things occurred at the same time and think, well, maybe those are causal, or maybe they come about similarly because of an external factor we don't really know.
Right, but you can say about it like anything, though, right?
Yeah, I mean that's empiricism is kind of like that. In
right, but I'm just saying you could say that about waste. You could say, well, it's not a 1-for-1 for why more waste exists.
Yeah, no, yes, like I agree. Like we have imperfect knowledge and we attempt to ascertain the truth, and we utilize the scientific method in order to, you know, gain more evidence so that we can do that. And then we assume things to be true so that we can build upon them to find other truths. And, you know, we utilize their utility in terms of their power of prediction, and just kind of hope with that. But there are certain things we can know to be true, right? Both economically and philosophically. And that's because, you know, you take axioms that you assume to be true, but if those axioms are grounded in things that you can prove, and then you can move from there, you know, then you can know those things to be true.
So do you want to move on to super chats? I told Scott we were only going to talk for a couple of hours, and then because I know we have about a bazillion super chats to read.
Well, is there something else you wanted to specifically hone in on?
Me?
No, Scott.
Me?
Sure.
No, Scott. I was asking Scott.
I'm down for anything. Like my content and my brain usually is like in one of two places. It's usually like shoulder to shoulder with the right wingers on like culture war issues. I've interviewed a lot of detrans people and done a lot of that stuff. And, you know, especially because, you know, there's not many people that actually understand their philosophy, or it's libertarianism. You guys wanted to focus on libertarianism, and hell yeah, dude, I'm all for it. I'm available whenever. I enjoy a good conversation.
This has been pleasant and not as contentious as I thought it might be. So props to you. I do think, I mean, these conversations are difficult because, I mean, we kind of have a completely different worldview. So I think it's interesting to try to get down to where the axioms diverge. So I think we got some of that going with our morality talk. Go ahead.
I view myself, right, like someone in the 1500s crying out for classical liberalism and democracy and being looked at like an insane person. Because in the 1500s, if you said we should have constitutional republics and the power should be vested in the people through democracy, you would be looked at as a raving lunatic. And I think in order to move forward and progress as a species, both morally and economically and scientifically, we're going to have to give up these silly warmongering, violent, thieving, corrupt systems of governance and finally continue forward the vision that the Enlightenment set forward, which is individual liberty and private property. And you know, that's why the name for the show is Fabian Liberty, because I'm a Fabian, not a Fabian socialist, but a Fabian nevertheless, and an incrementalist that I don't think this is going to happen in 20 or 30 years. I'm just trying to plant seeds.
Well, do you understand our perspective? I would say that there are a lot of places in the world that the things that you're advocating for already exist. And those places are not very good places to live compared to this place.
I can't think of any place. The closest I can think of towards actual anarchism that respects private property rights would probably be the Republic of Kospaya from 1440 to 1826. And that was a fairly successful anarchistic community that engaged in free trade.
Well, this is a problem. If you want to enforce private property rights, I would argue that you need some sort of state to do it. And the reason why the places in the world that are basically stateless or have some sort of feckless state are so bad to live is because they don't have property rights, because they don't have a strong state to enforce property rights.
Well, I would say that it depends on what you mean by state, because we might agree, right? My biggest contention with the state is that it is an involuntary, arbitrary thing that has been imposed upon people instead of communities gathering together that want to live under shared ideals and agree to not violate other people's rights in order to do so. Right. So there's very, very,
but why
what you desire. Go ahead.
Why do Sitch and I think that is impossible? What you just stated.
Well, I don't know if we've actually said why in the
statists.
conversation. But, well, no, so the reason
we did.
The reason I think it's kind of impossible. Well, the thing is like the system you're laying out, if everyone had the same philosophical principles that you did, then obviously that would work. I don't think most people do. And I think you do need to have, the kind of system that either incentivizes bad behavior in productive ways, and you do need a kind of a state with a monopoly on violence to enforce those things.
Do you agree with the average citizen from North Korea how North Korea should be governed?
I don't know what the average citizen in North Korea thinks about how
let's assume they all worship dear leader genuinely in their heart.
Then obviously I wouldn't agree with that system. Yeah, sure.
Right. So you don't need everyone to agree, right? Like North Korea can be North Korea and can be wrong and can be bad, right? Like when you say that, like, yeah, sure, that works in fantasy land. What I'm saying is like, well, what just what if, right? What if one community of a few thousand people did it, like in Chiron, Mexico, for example, right, where they currently are, where they've tripled the GDP per capita of the people living there, where their food is much healthier, where they've planted 3,000 hectares of forest ever since they kicked the Mexican government out and established an anarchistic community. You know, it's mutualist, right? It's not exactly what I advocate for, but it is an anarchist community, nevertheless, that is doing swimmingly. What if a group like that existed, like they do, right? And it inspired people. And then there was another one. And then somewhere else in the world, there was another one. And somewhere else in the world, there was another one. And then over a process of 100 years, a third of the world is living this way and is self-sufficient and has, contracts for, armies on retainer and things like that. And they're economically out-competing these people still using this old system. I think you'd look in a world very much like today, where we have liberal democracies, and yet you still see communist dictatorships that crash and burn. And it's like, that doesn't mean that America can't exist because North Korea is a communist dictatorship, right? Like, I'm just saying, You see what you feel me?
No, so like, okay, well, I mean, yeah, like hypothetically, if you had some place that could crop up somewhere that has a completely different system and is able to outcompete everyone, obviously that will be the system everyone adopts, obviously. But I'm skeptical. Well, first of all, I mean, obviously it would be impossible, seemingly impossible for like in the United States, for the US government to just say like, oh, sure, we're just going to start saying that you can buy, a city and manage it yourself outside of, federal law. Like that's obviously not going to happen for any reason. So it's hard for me to even imagine the scenario in the first place. But
yeah, I'm an incrementalist, right? Like I don't think this shit happens tomorrow. Though, to be fair, all of a sudden Saudi Arabia could decide, we're done with using OPEC Plus could be like, we're done with using the US dollar as the reserve currency. And who knows what the fuck America looks like once that hyperinflation kicks in.
Well, first of all, I don't think Saudi Arabia would ever do that. But if they did, I think we would manage to, I think the country would manage to continue, and I don't think would descend into chaos. And the problem is that even if it did, like say the worst case happens and, the American economy collapses and the country descends into chaos, I'm like, you're not going to have a situation where you have these sort of, NAP agreeing, anarchical communities cropping up. You're going to have like the situation we've seen through all human history, which is the warlords come and they start taking over shit by force, and you have all these like local regional warlords.
Yeah, but
I mean, I think kind of
the appeal to history is exactly the same argument you would make against someone trying to institute liberal democracies in a world that only had monarchies, right? Like it's already been proven that appeal to history is
no. So the problem is it's not an appeal to history; it's an appeal to psychology, and this is the issue that I have. Is that I think the reason liberal democracy basically became as popular as it did was because it figured out a way to sort of incentivize good behavior or pro-social behavior from shitty behavior in the way that humans basically act, selfish and cruel and all these other things. And the thing is that whatever system, in my opinion, whatever system is the most efficient system is going to be the one that gets adapted the most because everyone has to compete with each other. And so that's why I said, like, yeah, if you had your anarchy community that could safely compete with everyone and kept winning, then that will become the dominant system. I'm just saying I don't see it even being able to get to that point because I think the kind of world you would need that people would basically engage in these sort of like self-agreeing anarchy systems would require the safety and security of a liberal democracy in the first place to even exist.
What you're saying may be true. I disagree, but I won't say that it is my opinion that is the weight, right? But I could be screaming into the void for no reason. What I will say is that within our own nation state, right, like there are layers of things that are kind of built onto each other. So you can't really fully test things within a nation state that has all of these systems that are built upon other systems, right? But even still, you still have, like I explained, I didn't explain this, but like the lodge healthcare system was superior in America to the private health insurance system. You had the Jews, the Hasidic Jews in New York that, having their private security and ambulances. You have Disney up until recently that kind of had their own kind of county in a lot of ways. You have the Beachy Amish that I mentioned, right? Like there are systems that spring up naturally within these systems that self-segregate, that do very well and compete. And so, like, yeah, I don't know what the future holds.
Well, they're not competing against the government, though.
And they're not competing on security. Security is like a blanket thing.
Well, the Jews are in a lot of ways because
they can
hate crimes.
Right. But they still have to abide by federal law.
Yeah, no, I agree.
State law, like they can't, right? So
I agree that like that there's really only two paths towards the type of community that I set forth. Number one is my strategy, which is incrementalism, right? And that is slowly we should get rid of all of the socialistic tendencies of the state to a reduced minarchist government, and all of a sudden people's views, opinions, and the way that we engage change because of it. And then the second is some form of chaos, right? Like some form of collapse. I don't want that, right? And there's absolutely no guarantee that what replaces it in the collapse is what I advocate for. In fact, it'll likely be worse. And so some of this is in the realm of theory, but some of it isn't, right? And some of the principles, I think the the reasonable, limited government people would do real fucking well to ground themselves in better sound economic theory and a better understanding of human rights so that they don't have the wool over their eyes.
Maybe. I don't disagree. Anonymous Coward for $5 says, Fabian Liberty, how do you deal with arguing against people who say they deal in, quote, politics and they sidestep philosophy? See Tim versus Emma from last week.
I didn't see Tim versus Emma, but if people refuse to engage in politics, refuse to engage in philosophy and only engage in politics from a pragmatic perspective, what they're attempting to do is enslave you to their philosophical framework. And so you have to engage in an internal critique while you also simultaneously attack the presumed consequences of whatever it is based off of their values and outcomes. I've done this at Destiny both times we've been on panels, and both times he's gotten so frustrated at it that he just left the panel and like cooked food and came back like a half hour later, because it breaks people like that. Like once you start to expose that is actually their grift, it's pretty easy to deal with them. But of course,
hold on, what was
two
this
simultaneous
grift?
arguments.
What happened here?
Refusing
You exposed
to engage
Destiny
in
for
philosophy.
being you exposed Destiny for being a grifter because he refused to engage in philosophy.
Well, I'm not saying a grifter in terms of lying for the money. I mean, the grift is that the argument is only about the politics and not about the philosophy, because it allows them to sneak in all of their axioms that like you're not allowed to attack. And it's like, I think you're a Nazi because I believe you're a Nazi, therefore you're a Nazi. And it's like, if I'm not allowed to, for example, attack the idea that, you thinking I'm a Nazi is a valid evidence that I'm a Nazi, then like by default, I'm a Nazi, right? Like, so I have to go to the philosophy.
Isn't philosophy a system to find truth? And there are different forms of systems, like empiricism is based on evidence, rationalism is based on rational thought. There are all these different fields of philosophy, but they're all designed to obtain knowledge, true false statements, to evaluate true false statements.
I don't want to get too spicy while we're in the super chats, but I would say that many philosophies are anti-knowledge and they're anti-life.
Well, I mean, I hate going back to definitions again, but what do you mean by philosophy? What are you saying?
Before we go on this side quest, I want to say,
why are we doing? Yeah.
I know I haven't seen your conversations with Destiny, though I did find them on YouTube, so I'm curious to watch them now. But I do agree with kind of what you were saying about how if you're in a conversation with someone and they tell you like, I'm not going to talk about philosophy or morality or something to that effect, and they say, I'm just going to talk about like politics. I agree that at least when I've heard that being done, it is because they do want to smuggle in whatever their moral claims are without actually having to justify them. And we did see this in the Tim Pool Emma conversation, because Tim brought up like, what are you basing your philosophy on? And she said, I'm not making a philosophical claim. I'm making a political claim. And then immediately after, she says something about like something being moral, like the moral thing to do. And it's like, how can you even say that? How can you say those statements back to back? So
politics is a way to adjudicate public policy, which is about right and wrong behavior. So, I mean, the two are inseparable, morality and politics.
Right.
So what I would say is the biggest weakness of the right so far as I see it is that the right now understands by and large that politics is downstream of culture. And they're only just now beginning to understand that politics and culture are both downstream of philosophy.
Well, I mean, I don't think that was like, I think the right always knew politics was downstream from culture. I'm not sure that's like a new thing.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like, I mean, with the normies, right? Not within like the online political space, but like even your regular, I don't give a fuck about politics person is like, yeah, these fucking wackos trying to make everything woke and trying to interject their shit in media and things like that. Like, I don't know that they were so ardently aware of that as an issue maybe 30 years ago.
Well, I mean, obviously, like the wokeness wasn't a thing 30 years ago. I mean, 30 years ago
it was, but just not as
well. Obviously, to a significantly, lesser extent.
Read that book, Sitch.
Which book?
90s Los Angeles was
No,
swimming.
right. There was, in the 90s, there was the PC movement that popped up, and then I don't know why it went away. It kind of died for like 10 years, and then it came back.
It was defeated by liberals.
Nice. But no, I mean, because I think the thing is, like, obviously for a lot of American history, conservatives were very much, the moral majority. Were pushing to have, the culture be embedded with their moral claims and such. I think, there could be something that happened where, with Reagan coming in and kind of pushing neoliberalism, that I'm sure that definitely weakened the right wing's claims on moral statements, because if all your arguments are kind of like, from the neoliberal perspective, it's kind of hard to argue that economically, but not also accept that culturally.
Real quick, I have a way better and way shorter answer.
Sure.
Which is, I got half of it from chat, and then it was like, oh, ding, ding. Yeah. Next time somebody says that shit, just go, okay, well, anyone with a fucking PhD and a degree in political science has a PhD, a doctorate in philosophy. The two are inexorably linked. Shut the fuck up. And then just
That's pretty funny. That is a good retort. Yes. That's a good retort. Let's see. Christian Baller for $10 says threshold deontology is the most based, followed by moral particularism. Okay.
It's not really a question.
No, it's just a statement.
Moral particularism feels like a cope to me. I don't know that I know anybody that actually believes it.
Moral particularism is the view that the moral status of an action is not in any way determined by moral principle. Rather, it depends on the configuration of the morally relevant features of the action in a particular context.
Yeah. It's just it's okay when I do it, but not when you do it because of these reasons. It's like, I don't know. It's like utilitarian calculus squared to just get to whatever it is the fuck you want to do anyways. Like, I don't doubt that it is a normative, like that it is follows the rules to like be a normative ethical framework. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just like the way that I see it utilized is just as like a circular logic to like get to whatever I believe in any circumstance myself anyways.
I see. Take that, Christian.
Or moral subjectivism with extra steps is one of my people.
There you go.
Basically.
Stug for $2 says, what do you mean when you say logically consistent in this context?
I don't know what context I was using it at that point.
Okay.
Well, Christian Baller for $10 also says morality has no truth value, which,
right.
That's contested by moral objectivists, obviously. But I understand what you're saying, that, obviously if you're making descriptive claims, those have true and false value that moral claims don't necessarily have.
If you're making a moral propositional statement, it's still a propositional statement, and it still is in order for it to be a logically propositional statement, then it has to follow the law of non-contradiction. And even still, sometimes moral claims will not be contradictory because of contradiction within the statement itself, but sometimes it's a performative contradiction. So like when the postmodernist says that, truth is subjective and that there is no objective truth, well, they also are sneaking in the not P, right? The P is truth is subjective and there is no objective truth. The not P is I believe what I'm saying is an objective truth. And so it's a performative contradiction. Either they're jokingly saying nonsense that you should just dismiss, or they're believing something is both true and false at the same time, which is a contradiction. So no matter what, it's gobbledygook.
Interesting. Yeah.
Present Sunday. Cough, cough, cough. What's your first thought for 10 Canadian says, hey, Scott, what do you think has more control in your thinking, the writer or the elephant?
The writer or the elephant? I agree with the writer and the elephant analogy from, oh God, what is the moral psychologist? Height. Thank you. I agree. As a matter of fact, there's a really, really good video on rhetoric that I think everyone should watch that deals with the writer and the elephant a little bit. Oh God, it's been years since I've seen it, but it's about the PBS showdown with Mr. Rogers and like looking at his speech and describing all of those things. But yeah, I do think that people tend to, this is why when I debate, I'm not usually debating the person I'm debating. I'm really debating for the audience's sake. because
Right.
I don't think I'll ever fucking change the opinion of the person I'm talking to when they kind of are already in a position where they need to be the better person selling their ideas to their audience. Like they're so grounded, feet in the ground, that you're never going to really change their opinion. Most people aren't that open, but I'm doing
Of
it.
course,
I'm
well, yeah,
exposing it for the
Right.
audience. So no, I agree. I would say that the elephant does more of the talking, but I try and come back to logos to the best of my ability when I'm.
That's all we can do. You can just try.
Wow, that's it's honest of you to say. Like everyone always says, the writer. Like, but
Yeah, no, well,
I
mean,
always think
went
it
to
is
grad
the
school.
elephant.
I went to grad school for counseling, and so like hilariously enough, I ended up doing politics online. But I thought I would do like a specialize in like looking at psychology and stuff, and I do to a certain extent in culture war issues. Talk about like certain personality disorders and things like that, and look at psychological science. But more often than not, I engage in political philosophy.
Nice. Nilo for $15. Thank you, Nilo. Says number 1, truth equals a falsifiable statement of fact. Truth doesn't equal fact. Number 2, opinions are non-falsifiable statements. Logical and value-based doesn't equal falsifiable. 3, values create wildly different moral systems. To clarify, facts are falsifiable is either true or false. People say opinion when they mean prediction. Values are moral foundations.
Yep.
I'd have to write that out.
Totally
Yeah,
agree.
it was a lot to take in.
I don't know that I
yeah.
necessarily disagree with it, but in what context they're
the
arguing.
contention here is you coming out and saying, I have a moral system here that's just descriptive, and I'm not making. You did. What are you talking
I
about?
said I have an ethical system. I made
Ethical
clear,
system.
I have.
Got it.
Okay, so you're saying I have an ethical system that is not making any prescriptive claims for people. It's just a descriptive system of the world, and that's the rub here with the super chats.
No, I know. I said it is debatable whether or not a prescriptive claim of an ought not could.
How do you have an ethical system that doesn't tell people how to behave?
Well, it tells people what they can't argue is justified. Some people, which I don't know that I'm fully on board with this just yet, right? In some ways I'm a philosophical baby compared to like the great thinkers, right? Like, so I don't know that I'm necessarily 100% married to it, though I do lean this way. That it is not that it. Some people would argue that it because it's a null, right? Because it nullifies any action via contrary, not a contradiction. Then it gives you an ought not, and it's you ought not aggress upon people, and therefore it does prescribe an ought not to people, which would put it in some realm into the domain of morality. And yet it's still, no matter what, doesn't tell you what you ought to do, right? Like libertarianism never tells you ought to do something, right? Which a fully fleshed out moral framework tells you how you ought to live your life, right? The virtue ethicist says you ought to be brave. The Christian says you ought to live your life in service to God, et cetera, right? Whereas libertarianism doesn't tell you what you ought do. It only tells you what you ought not do, and that's a maybe.
Well, it's still a moral framework, an ethical system, whatever you want to call it. If you're telling people what not to do, that's prescribing behavior by its very definition. You can't prohibit behavior without prescribing behavior.
Again, right? Like we can go down the rabbit hole again. I'd prefer not to. I feel like I made my peace in terms of describing that if one does act against the non-aggression principle, they themselves cannot logically argue that the same thing ought not be done to them. That's when the contradiction, not the contrary, comes into play. Right. And so it's like that's
the enforcement mechanism right there.
Right. If you're stopped. Yeah. But nevertheless, it doesn't magically make it morality. What it's saying is one could choose to live by might is right. But what I'm saying is the moment that the person that lives by might is right then argues that they have rights, they're in a contradiction. So you cannot simultaneously argue that might is right and that you can aggress upon people while also saying that other people can't aggress upon you and it be logically coherent. And so the claim is invalid. And so I have every right to argue the non-aggression principle for myself and then attack you when you steal my shit.
Sitch, what is a better enforcement mechanism? The threat of incarceration or the shaming for making a logical contradiction?
I obviously agree in incarceration. Right. But I think a better way to like conceptualize for us that what Scott is saying is essentially like the argument is that if you're wearing a badge that says I abide by the non-aggression principle, and then you decide that you're going to start abiding by might makes right, the non-aggression principle badge transforms into the might makes right principle badge. It's just different. It's just saying that you can't adhere to this framework and do these specific actions, which is true. I mean, that is just an objectively true thing. As soon as you start acting outside the framework, you're no longer acting within the framework. But
that's the same with any moral framework.
That is the same with any framework. Yeah. I don't know if that grants it enforcement power necessarily, but
this is why they go around talking about the sinner. The sinner has stepped outside of the moral framework.
Right. Of course. Right. And that's the enforcement mechanism for most these sorts of philosophies, moralities, ideologies, whatever we want to call them, is the danger of stepping outside the framework. So, but anyway.
Nevertheless, I can argue for human rights and the statist can't.
There you go. Calvin Papper for $5 says, is it okay for PayPal to charge a fee, and how is that different than the government dollars?
Why would it be un-okay for PayPal to charge a fee? I don't understand the question.
Is it okay for PayPal to charge a fee?
Is it okay for a company that you voluntarily use to charge a fee for their services, and how is that different than a state that steals money from you no matter what you do? And then provides you services that you may or may not want. Like they're wildly different. I don't know. Like it's silly.
Right. The difference you're saying is that with the government, you have to pay taxes. It's not voluntary, right?
Yeah, it's not voluntary. And on top of that, you get no choice in the services that are provided. I mean, you get some like layered level of an illusion of choice that might come true, or the corporations might get what they want anyways.
Right.
They usually do.
Calvin Papper for $2 says, what problem is OnlyFans solving?
What problems is OnlyFans solving?
A couple of problems.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, OnlyFans was originally designed to be a PayPal alternative, because it was a free speech platform. So it's kind of funny that those two questions come together. So in a way, OnlyFans was solving the problem of censorship and exclusion of financial transactions and support that was occurring from PayPal. And again, that's a principal difference between that and the state. But other than that, I think OnlyFans girls are just slatterns with very little value, and I don't think they help society at all.
Wow.
I think they mostly harm society. But I mean, I have no right to kick your door down and stop you because I can't.
Sure.
I can't. You know what I mean? Like I can't prove that it is of active aggression to get naked on camera so that 13-year-old boys can use mommy and daddy's credit card to fucking get off to whilst rotting their fucking brain.
Mm-hmm. I feel like there's a rule, an unspoken rule, it should be spoken, which is that any platform that has no censorship will become a pornographic platform eventually.
Yeah, probably.
That's like a rule of nature, I think.
That's just the rule of nature, yeah.
That is natural law.
That's the natural law. There's your natural law. Okay.
Well, I mean, libertarians are only free speech insofar as it's concerned that we have a state. Like ultimately, like I don't give a fuck about free speech. What I give a fuck about is the right of the property, right? So if Twitter wants to ban porn on its website, hell yeah, right? Like that's all in the private property owner's domain. What I don't like is when Twitter is behind the scenes being coerced by a large group of corporations and NGOs that are taxpayer funded, and the Department of Defense to try and make sure that the state can control speech of its citizens and silence dissent against government actions, which they do and did.
Thank you, chat. That will be Sitch's 34th rule. Yeah.
Yeah.
Libertarian Sasquatch for $10 says, how are you defining efficiency in regards to policing? Is it number of arrests? Local police already struggle with trust. Private policing would just increase distrust in policing because it's now for profit.
Yeah, so number of arrests has always been a bad metric. Even in the establishment, one of the original rules of policing set up by the constable in England when the modern policing system was invented. I can't remember his name right now, but it's a real big figure in the creation of modern policing. under a state. Even he stated as one of his primary rules that number of arrests and detainments and captures is always going to be a horrible metric to use. If anybody remembers what the name of that guy is, let me know. But or I could look it up later. So that's always going to be a bad metric when I'm talking about efficiency. Efficiency, as far as I'm concerned, is what is it that the private property owner desires, right? So it is always going to be more efficient if in a market because of the local knowledge problem, right? Like, which is to say that the state's central planning is not going to have the same information as a market that has prices, and prices signify the subjective kind of values of the supply and demand equation, right? And so it is always going to, a private market as opposed to central planning is always more closely going to ally to what the property owner wants in terms of their individual needs. And so for some, that could mean arresting every hooligan that they don't like because their basketball shorts are too short. And if you don't fucking like it, don't go to that neighborhood. And for some, that is going to mean it is going to mean the safest possible community, et cetera, right? So that how you measure efficiency is going to be left up to the individual because we have a subjective value.
But if the efficiency metric is number of criminals killed, don't you think could be potentially infringing on other people's rights?
I mean, it depends on what the crime is. If the crime is like petty
jaywalking,
you kill them, yeah, that's a violation of their rights, right? Like because
who says so? Not according to our private security company.
Yeah, you're just memeing at this point and not honestly engaging.
No, look. There will be plenty. I'm sure there are plenty of places where warlords will kill people for jaywalking or for looking at them funny.
It doesn't have to be jaywalking.
Warlords exist today, and America doesn't step in unless they can profit from it. Nobody gives a fuck about Darfur, or nobody gives a fuck about Yemen. They give a fuck about Ukraine because there's profit to be made in maintaining it. But the question is relevant because there are competing interests, and the question is always who is going to adjudicate between these competing interests. And all you're doing is setting up a system where you have security companies that have competing interests. Like I could set up a security company and say we are more efficient because we kill all the criminals. And I'm sure there are lots of people that be like, damn, I want that security company. I don't like criminals. I want them dead. Okay, but this is a
and if you kill a couple extra people that are innocent, that's okay too.
Listen, let me engage with this silliness. All right. The non-aggression principle, right, deals with when an individual becomes an aggressor, right? And so when someone is a criminal, right, when they have violated someone else's rights, they need to, in order to argue for their rights, restitution must be paid. The petty theft that is occurring, right, where you kill someone makes you and that private security firm an aggressor. And
no, they aggressed on me when they violated my private property rights.
You're either memeing or you really have
how is that not? Hold on, how is that not the case? They have violated my private property rights. Hell, if they look at me funny, they've aggressed on me.
First of all,
they violated my respect.
No,
what's that?
This is getting towards the end of the show, and you're memeing, right? Like, so
again, I'm not. Look, I am not memeing. These are the conflicts that arise in society. Okay. We have right now. We have policing details that go to social media because gang members post stuff on social media that disrespects other gang members, and they want to basically kill one another over these things posted on social media.
Adam. This is I will engage, but let me explain basic libertarianism, right? So libertarianism at its most basic, right, is the non-aggression principle, right? You're saying that once someone becomes an aggressor, they're an aggressor that is worthy of any punishment ever. That is not libertarianism. That is not how that works. That is not what restitution is.
So it has to be an equal.
It has to be proportional, right? So it has to
and
be
who adjudicates how it's proportional?
We've described this several different instances. Ultimately, it is the observer, right? And so, I brought up the idea of intersubjectivity, which is that there is an objective understanding of a violator of a right, right? But we don't always
which observer?
Any observer, right?
So, but I am one of the observers in the case.
Let me get through this because I'm really trying to help you understand. And if you don't care to understand, you just want to meme, like we can just meme. But I'm actually trying to answer your question, right? So intersubjectivity means that like there has to be an establishment or communication of property rights so that an outside observer, remember how we talked about ethical frameworks require an observer, right? Because if it's just two people and one person gets rid of the other, then there's no moral dilemma there, right?
That's a different, we have different.
The community, fair enough. But the community, right, creates a system of social norms and rules and likely voluntary contracts that set up their own form of governance and the way that they do things. So it's going to be different the way that the pacifists, the Amish, handle things, right? That might be simply banishment. That might be, you're banished from the community, right? Or or the council will shake their finger at you. I don't agree with that system, but that is one way of doing it. Another way would be the insurance companies, et cetera.
Well, hold on a second. So any community can set up any system because this is the difference between honor cultures and dignity cultures. Because in an honor culture, if you look at me funny or disrespect me in any way, I am allowed to kill you.
But that's not a conflict. Remember how we said conflict? Conflict is when different individuals want to use scarce resources towards opposing means, right? I have a right and control over my body. I can look at you any fucking way that I want to look at you, and I'm not utilizing any scarce resource.
Respect isn't a scarce. Respect isn't a scarce resource.
I think you guys are talking about two different things.
Attention isn't a scarce resource. Reputation isn't a scarce resource. It definitely is.
Reputation management is an entirely different realm because it's abstract and it's held by each individual, right? So you don't own reputation, right? I own reputation and Adam owns reputation. PSA Stitch, every human being has an understanding of the reputation of another person, right? So like when you own a restaurant, right? Your restaurant has a reputation, but it's not reputation that your restaurant owns. The reputation exists in the mind of every person that knows about your restaurant. We can get into weird weeds if we want to talk about libel and slander and stuff like that, but I feel like at the end of a super chat conversation, that's like a whole nother conversation.
Well, I'm just saying, obviously, a lot of the conflict in society is propagated because of reputational damage.
And I would disagree in terms of calling that conflict. What I would say is that individuals are aggressors when they're attacking other people based upon their reputation.
Okay, but the question is how to respond.
Right, and I said that the punishment needs to be proportional, right? Like if someone
attacking their
Okay, you guys are talking about two different things. So
yeah, totally. Let's move on.
No. We'll just say quickly. So Adam, you're talking about more like how you could have a system where you have this kind of like local governance that could devolve into a system you're talking about, Adam, but that wouldn't apply to Scott's framework because Scott's framework is still saying even if you have these local systems, they still under his framework should be based around the non-aggression principle and the other principles he's laying out.
Okay, gotcha.
What I'll say is I'll quote Robert Higgs here and say that when my house is on fire, I don't refuse to put the fire out just because in the future it might catch on fire again. Like there's a fire, so I put it out. Like just because some society somewhere might devolve into a monopoly or a bad system doesn't mean that I don't critique what's wrong.
Sure.
Morally
Yeah, I
with
agree.
The current one.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree. But anyway. Mr. Ubercross for $10 says, why would you choose to go to court if you didn't have to? What consequences could be held over you for not participating?
Again, it depends upon the society that you exist in, right? Mm-hmm. So, if you exist, we'll put everything in the frame of Ancapistan, right? Where you have rights enforcement agencies. You've already voluntarily signed that you will show up to court. When you purchased you signed away your rights, essentially, to a rights enforcement agency that says, hey, look, I trust you via this contract to represent me in property disputes. to protect my interests, but also to protect my interests when I violate others' rights, incidentally or on purpose, and vice versa when they do the same to me. So if you refuse to show up to court after having already signed a contract saying you would show up to court, well, and the court finds you guilty of some crime, then we get to use force to take your property away as restitution for the crime that you committed.
This sounds very familiar to me.
Well, I'm just thinking, and like, just for like sake, for the ease of the argument, like say hypothetically, we had America does become kind of the system you're talking about, and just like each state, well, just so we can have the number 50, each state has their own kind of like opted in, people sign a contract to live there, abide by the rules, so everything's voluntary. But I mean, you still have a problem with the system where if someone is born and grows up and they say, I don't like any of these 50 states contract, I mean, but they have to choose one, right?
Yeah, so there is a certain argument that, like, instead of having a million Liechtensteins, right, you have basically you have nation states in and of themselves, that the covenant communities become so large that like you're kind of stuck in that situation. The way that I look at that is in understanding that, like, the default state of man is poverty, right? It is the communist that says that the environmental circumstances are an act of coercion on the individual. It is unfortunate that there is no free Liechtenstein for you to move to. And that may be what you advocate for and fight for in some area because you don't like any of the available systems to you. But let's say I'm a dog fucker, right? I love fucking dogs. I just love it, dude. Nothing better than
where's the
ass, right?
Somebody CT.
And let's say
I want to tweet that out by the end of the show.
You got it, right? And there are a million Liechtensteins, but none of them let me lick dog's ass, right? That's because everyone has agreed that you're a fucking freak and nobody likes you and that you abuse animals. And while technically that's your property, no one wants to hang out with you and no society will let you do that. So if there's no woods for you to move in, it's not the fucking state enforcing oppression upon you because nobody lets you lick dog ass. It's because nobody lets you lick dog ass because everybody's agreed that that's fucking gross. And so the same situation is true if we have 50 Liechtensteins instead of a million, is that, like, no covenant community is going to one-to-one agree with everything that you want, right? Like, there's going to be some opinion, some way of doing things that you don't like, and you sacrifice that to live in those communities because of the very thing that you stated before. The problem is when you steal land, when you murder people, and you force people into situations, and you create these systems of citizenship, in terms of like even if you leave California, for example, you still have to pay California tax, right? Like, there's all of these oppressive systems that are inherent to nation states. And furthermore, I just don't think 50 states is like actually follows it from the consequentialist framework. I think it is more Fantasyland even than what I'm proposing, because monopolies don't tend to stick around, right? Like in a free market, like I just don't think that it would organize itself that way.
I don't know if we actually know that. Because has there ever been like a truly free market, unless we're talking about like the anarchy of, global politics?
Yeah, I mean, like, and the thing is like there are certain things that you never get.
He's still talking.
Did that audio cut out? What happened?
Yeah, I don't know what happened.
We can't hear you, Scott. Your audio cut out.
Maybe he hit a cable or something.
No, I muted myself.
Oh, there you go. Okay. I was like,
I did that. Okay.
No
What'd you do?
The globalists cut him off.
Let's read another super chat.
No, I have a new mic, and I like it. It's a touch mute button, so sometimes when I move it, it'll just like mute, and it's annoying.
I didn't do that. I'm innocent.
Yeah, no. Sitch Adam didn't do that. He didn't do that.
Okay. Let's see. BMO for $20 says, Scott, how can you be an ANCAP when you are a supporter of Vape Nation? Is this true?
I don't know what Vape Nation is. Is that like where I got one of my companies from? Are they like a progressive company? I don't.
Well, no, I thought
you
Vape Nation
vaping.
Was like, I thought Vape Nation was like the whole thing. H3H3 was like part of it.
Vape Nation is an
Oh.
old H3 video, but you are vaping. I think that's where the super chat comes from.
Oh, okay.
Fair
You're
enough. Fair
vaping.
enough.
Oh my god.
You know, I don't know. I'm 32. Sometimes internet things go over my head.
Wow, what an
Ancient.
old man.
What a
Jeez.
boomer. Jeez.
He's ancient. Let's see. Jonathan Smith for $10 says philosophies are theoretical attempts to achieve something that's truth, money, happiness, etc. Doctrine is the attempt to bring that into reality. Socialism is a philosophy. Marxism is a reformed version of the philosophy of socialism. Communism is a doctrine attempt at Marxism.
Interesting. Okay, John. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Jonathan.
I
That's
agree.
the perfect answer.
Fondue for $20. Fondue for
You
$20.
disagree with that,
I
Scott?
said I don't necessarily disagree.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Good.
We'd have to break it apart a little bit more than that.
Right.
I don't really feel like doing it. Like, also, like, what do you mean by socialism? Because there's a bunch of different forms of socialism.
Right.
Fondue for
Fondue.
$20. Thank you, Fondue. Says the might makes right argument isn't quote I have a right you can't ignore. It's a who will stop me? You question mark?
Yeah,
That's
I think
true.
might makes reality, but it doesn't make right. Right? Like, I think, you know, I
Yeah,
think
I
there's
agree.
a wonderful article written by a homosexual neo-Nazi crazed fitness influencer called Jack Donovan. All right, he's he's a wildcat, but he wrote a wonderful article called "Violence is Golden." Right, and basically his argument is violence is the answer to the question, or else what?
I mean, yeah, necessarily, sure.
It's a really good article, though. You should read it.
Listen, I don't read homosexual neo-Nazis, okay?
You know, that's you know, in
Based.
this day and age, that's you know, that's not.
I will
that
read
controversial.
homosexuals and I will read neo-Nazis, but I will not read both. Daddy Grover for £5 says, what if you split cops into two rival factions, different phone numbers, and the better team gets more money, which encourages better policing?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, that's
basically,
interesting idea.
they're incentivized to work together because, you know, there is a certain, like, you know, game theory here, right? Where, like, if they work fully competing and they don't have, like, jurisdictional lines and things like that, then both of them kind of fail at their job, right? So
Right. I think
policing is a
Danny's saying
little
something a little different, though. He's saying, like, it sounds like he's saying there wouldn't be two different sets of rules. There'd be the same sets of rules, and there'd be one jurisdiction that they both have.
Yeah.
You just have two
Yeah, I
different
already said
agencies enforcing those rules. So
Yeah, I already said that. That's because it's the private property owner that has the rules. The service is the enforcement mechanism of those rules, of which the police are purchasing the rights to be able to enforce those for a fee.
Right. Let's see. Drew Cipher for $5 says, as time goes on, I become less and less convinced on libertarianism. It all feels too utopian and improbable. Drew doesn't agree, I guess.
Well, yeah, fair enough. I mean, we're talking about the in case of anarcho-capitalism, right?
Right.
So I mean, I guess I question what one means by libertarianism, because if they mean, like, you know, reduce state involvement in economic transactions and things like that, then the evidence kind of speaks for itself in those, and then the end case of that is anarcho-capitalism. It sounds crazy because you're trying to imagine a whole new world, but the evidence is right before you that, you know, the things that work are things that get closer to anarcho-capitalism.
Supposedly, the evidence is right before you. Magor for $2 says, Adam, does Scott make you think philosophy is useful, or that philosophy muddies the water of otherwise perfectly understandable things? However, expecting logical systems to solve every problem is a lost cause anyway.
I wish I could have looked at that at the same time. Is that in super chats?
I was the one that just
Is it
wanted
in
to
super
use
chats?
acceptable definitions.
I do think, look, I
You know
do
what
think
I mean?
philosophy in this case is muddying the water, when I think we could talk about very, very simple concepts without defining them in philosophical terms. So I do, like, when you come out and say, oh, you're a deontologist, that means a lot to you, but I don't necessarily know that means a lot to our audience or Sitch or I. But if you described what a deontologist is, I think that could be useful for a conversation about.
Well, that's a different topic. I mean, that's a different concept.
That's just using big words, but I mean, so maybe my
well, I mean, I know
I am
what
an idiot, so I would appreciate it.
I know what epistemology means, but I'm going to assume most people are encountering that word for the first time and they don't necessarily know what it means. But if I say, how we come to truth, a system of how we come to truth, that is, they understand completely. I don't need to use the word epistemology.
Sure. But again, I was the one that wanted to use accepted definitions, just to be fair, right?
Well, this hold on. You're making my point. If I use epistemology, and you don't know what epistemology means, but if I say a system for discovering truth, I don't need to use it. I don't need to use a definition because you understand intrinsically what I'm talking about. Yeah, if you say deontology, we have to go to definitions. But if you just say whatever deontology is, we don't have to go to definitions.
Yeah, I agree. You derailed the conversation by introducing a new definition of morality.
Well, look, morality is a contested concept. And the point that I am making is that if you say morality, we have to go to definitions. But if I say a system of rules that binds individuals into a cooperative community, we don't have to go to definitions. We can talk about that thing, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. If you want to give if you want to create an abstract concept, right, and then we engage with that abstract concept.
I don't think it's an abstract concept, though. Everything that you've said here fits into my definition.
That's your okay. Well, now I have to define what an abstract concept is. I don't think the problem is.
Well, no, I understand what an abstract concept is.
Right, it's literally an abstract concept. Please, just go with me. Yes, if you say this is what I mean, right, and we don't use the word, and we want to do an internal critique within your system, then yeah, sure, you can have a conversation around. But I don't understand.
I mean,
well, no, but
I get what happened.
Wait.
Colloquially, I'm using abstract and colloquial terms here.
Just without having to rehash the entire argument. To be fair, as you pointed out, your argument kind of hinges on the separation of morality versus ethics. Which obviously, if you're talking to someone who doesn't believe that, then that's obviously going to be a big contentious thing. So you kind of have to, dive into that. So
right, which is why I didn't dismiss the conversation.
Right.
But I do think, I mean, if you're gonna have conversations around philosophy, and around important issues, I do think it is, I think it is valuable often, and I think a lot of online politics does this, where we kind of just colloquially use the things that we're talking about. And we want to move the needle in terms of one direction or another based off of our values. And those conversations are simplistic and they are impactful and they are meaningful. And I think they play well to a very large audience and better understanding the world. I agree. I also think that it is equally, if not more, impactful and meaningful, maybe not so enthralling, where you have to nail things down into the philosophy and understand them. Because I think more often than not, philosophy speaks through people. And once you really have a good understanding of philosophy, it's almost like the NPC that you see. I'm not seeing the person speak, I'm seeing the philosopher speak. And it's like, once you really understand the philosophy, you kind of already understand the argument and what it is that they're advocating for better than they do. And so,
sure, I understand. I mean, that's the whole point, when you talk about when you talk about using terms like, deontological and, any sort of jargon, it's a shorthand for a complicated concept to kind of, make the conversation move faster. And you're saying that, once you kind of understand whatever the philosophical framework is that the person's, talking about, you kind of have a greater understanding of whatever it is they're advocating for without having to spend an hour-long conversation. So,
But I'm not sure. The thing is, and what we try to do on the show is, we just try to get people to understand one another. And I feel like we could kind of articulate your worldview, your perspective, where you're coming from. I'm not sure that you could articulate our worldview, our perspective. And that's, I
think Scott could articulate our position.
Do you? Okay.
I guess, yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know that I've discussed, I mean, as far as I've seen this interview go so far, it has been a critique and a delving into libertarianism.
Right.
So
I'm
kind of at a disadvantage. I'm kind of at a disadvantage because you guys weren't really making a positive prescription about what it is your ideology is. So
Right.
like I wouldn't put myself in the hot seat of something I haven't heard you say trying to
No, I meant in
paraphrase.
terms of like you could articulate our critiques because obviously you're right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Okay.
But like but I mean if the conversation was, hey guys, let's talk about queer theory. You know what I
Right.
mean? I think we would be in a very different conversation because you're not trying to understand my position. We're
Right.
both united in trying to understand an opposing position.
Gotcha.
It's really just the framework of the conversation.
Jonathan Smith for $10 says a writ is backed by the power of the nation and gives you authority to do something, whereas moral right is whether it is evil or not. But English is a trade language and simplifies the difference. Interesting.
It's an interesting theory, I guess, about like the etymology of the words we're using, maybe, and the colloquial uses, maybe. I don't know, but I still think that there are different definitions. Whatever.
Okay. That was it for questions and super chat.
All right.
Word.
Well,
All right.
Scott, do you want to ask us anything before we let you go?
Before we fuck
well,
off?
I mean, like, I don't want to derail into some totally new topic. Like, we did a bunch of super chats. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Sure.
Free my boy Andrew. Adam, love you. Free
Look,
my boy Andrew.
I have no animosity towards Andrew, so just
Free him from jail.
Look,
There
he
you
came.
go.
He
I
came
love
at me, so I just, I don't. That's
Well,
not really.
it could-
That's
it
not
could
a
have
good
been-
strategy for
Right.
becoming
It
friends.
could, listen, and we talked.
with you.
Listen, we talked about this. This often happens. There was probably a miscommunication, right? You said something. Andrew perceived it as a slight, so then he attacked you, and then you responded by blocking. So an original miscommunication perceived a slight from both parties.
He felt disrespected,
Right.
Hey,
and
I'm
he's
just
managing his
I'm not-
reputation.
Right.
I'm not defending or attacking anybody. I'm just saying free my boy Andrew. All right. That's
There
all
you
I'm
go.
saying. That's my.
You're not
that's my
defending him.
closing.
You're just saying free him.
free him. All right. Freedom,
Okay.
liberty, libertas.
Okay. Fair enough.
Well, this was an enjoyable conversation. Do you want to shout out your channel before you take off?
Yeah. So, Fabian Liberty on YouTube. Primarily, we're on Rumble because free speech is better than being on this shit website, YouTube or Twitch. You know what I mean? It's just a bunch of progressive, far leftist activists. Neil Mohan is going to destroy YouTube eventually. So definitely make sure you get on Rumble. It's the place to be. Quartering just moved there. I don't know if you guys like Quartering or not. I think he's kind of silly. But nevertheless,
I think he's kind of what?
It's kind of silly. You know what I mean? It's
Oh,
it's
okay.
Yeah. I just don't think he's very serious, but he he does good work, I guess. But yeah, Fabian Liberty pretty much everywhere. Twitter, YouTube, Rumble. I appreciate you guys having me. I'd love to talk some other time, whenever, about like stuff other than just full blown libertarianism.
Sure.
If you ever want to critique some queer theory or some CRT, I was the one doing all of the work against fucking Joe Lewis and all these people in Twitch panels when no one else would, being called a
Nice.
crazy commie. For years I was doing that, and then finally everyone else started being like, "Oh, CRT is in schools," and I was like, "Bitch, I told you." But now it's Portrait of a Graduate in social emotional learning.
We had Joe Lewis on one time. He dropped the M-bomb and our video got demonetized. That's about all I remember of the conversation. So
Yeah.
Didn't Joe I'm trying to remember. I thought, didn't Joe basically admit to how incredibly anti-liberal CRT was in our conversation?
I don't remember. I couldn't remember anything
You
about
mean
that
like
conversation.
Chapter 1 of an introduction to critical race theory?
You don't listen. You don't understand how many people on the left that I say I'm against CRT because it's anti-liberal, and then that's the entire conversation. They just don't agree. So it's like, yeah, I know it's like ridiculous, but
It's like, all right, man. Well, then you don't know what it is. Next.
yeah, I know. Well, yeah, I don't know. If we cover a video, maybe we can have you on, and we can critique a video together on one of these topics, maybe at some point.
There you go. A little more friendly. I'll
Yeah,
promise
sure.
to be nice again, Adam.
That's cool. That's great.
I appreciate you having me on. Fabian,
Yeah,
Liberty
thanks for
everywhere.
coming.
I'm out. Real quick.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, if you guys, audience, if you're not doing anything, you want to know more libertarian stuff, I'll be interviewing Carolyn Ann Harlos, who's the secretary for the Libertarian Party.
Nice.
And
Sweet.
a hero to liberty. All right, pink flame of liberty. Shout out. But deuces.
Nice. Well, take care.
Take care, man.
Peace.